Good morning. If we get started here in a second, you finish grabbing your coffee and that sort of thing. First of all, we ran a little bit short on handouts. We're getting some more done, so if you didn't get some, we'll make sure that we get those to you this morning. So I think we're ready to get started. Let me introduce some of the folks that are here today. Jennifer Gonzalez, she's actually looking at getting some more copies. We've got Paul Turcotte, one of the staff members here, deals a lot with the finances and capital projects and a lot of the models. We've got Deb Perez back there. She's the audit czar, the facilities audit czar, and Torsia Brunton, she's the data czar. So we've got our czar system set up today. I guess that's the new catch thing to do, so we're going to do that. No, but actually, first of all, thanks for coming. We're looking at doing this on an annual basis. In the last year, a little over a year, probably the most active time of year for this sort of thing, whether it's the facilities inventory or space and that sort of thing. And that's because the institutions and the work of the working groups and the advisory groups put together actually rolled up their sleeves and got at it. As I came down here, I actually got the coordinating board in November. I started looking at some of the historical stuff, and a lot of great work was done. A lot of the stuff that came out of the advisory groups was really great stuff, and it was ideas, recommend the coordinating board does this, coordinating board does that, and it's great. Well, I just wanted, as a matter of perspective, this is it. It's a very small staff, and that's okay. So we count on that work of the working groups. Well, one of the things that happened with the PRT working group is that group really dove in, rolled up their sleeves, took an idea, handed it to the coordinating board, and said, here's what we think. And it was able to be with Deb's skill to kind of massage in some areas and add some great stuff to it, and it's really up there running. The same thing with the SUSE score, which replaced the utilization. Got to work, the advisory groups got in there and came up and had a product and said, here. Of course, had the influence of the coordinating board members, absolutely essential. Senior coordinating board staff came together, and there's a product. And it's done. It was effective. Okay, we're going to be doing more of that in the future, and we're going to talk about some of those things. Make sure I hit my other stuff. This is intended to be a dialogue. There aren't a whole lot of slides. For those of you that got slide packets, and we'll get some more to you, there aren't a whole lot of slides. We don't intend this to be a session where we sit up here and talk a great deal, and you sit back and nod, and then say, okay, well, they told us a bunch of stuff, then we left. Because the real knowledge is sitting right here. We had a great dialogue yesterday with the folks, got some really great feedback from them, and we'll count on that. Okay? And so the structure of this is going to be about a 50-minute talking time, dialogue, and then a 10-minute break. We're going to keep that pattern. Because when I was at an institution, I found that the most robust conversations took place at break. And what we'd like to do is we take these breaks, then come back, and then let's share some of those things we talked about on break and get those ideas out there. There's some things that we don't see. We don't see everything. We see the global stuff, and we can't get down the weeds. A, we don't have the people. You probably don't want us to. We don't want to. So we look at global things. But sometimes an issue becomes more pervasive than any one institution sees, and we don't necessarily see it. So we count on that feedback from you all. So in light of that, this is, and you can read the purpose there. First and foremost, and you'll see this a couple times, timely and accurate reporting. Conceptually, we have a given amount of time from the time the report's due till we have a statutory requirement to produce a report. Okay, those are two hard dates. Now, if the data aren't received from all institutions, because we have to get it from everybody before we can start, because most of the models are interdependent on each other, then that presses time. The time between those two dates is really the time for your review, which is critical from our perspective to be able to get these models out accurately. Because though we try very, very hard, we know there are going to be mistakes. What might be a little error, the old saying is there's no such thing as incremental decision at the street level. And it's kind of like when you turn those gears, you turn this little gear over here, one, and you don't even see the gear over here that starts going at 3,000 RPM and blows off the bearings. So we want to be able to see that. That's the feedback that you provide to us. But as those reports are delayed, we're just compressing that time for institutional review. Because we have a set amount of time to prepare the reports. It usually takes a few days depending on the report, sometimes longer. And those are built in. So it's absolutely essential that the data get in on time and accurately. That's especially critical this time because as we go over this, there are some significant changes to the report structure in the inventory, for the facilities inventory, and Torsh is here as a subject matter expert if you have questions on that. Okay? So where we might have had some hiccups before November 15th, December 1st, etc., that's going to be exacerbated with a new reporting model. Okay? So we want to make sure we're very forward on the lead end. There have been several pieces of legislation that have already either been signed by the governor or have been sent to the governor for signature. And we'd like to talk about those because they have an impact on the kind of things that we do in the resource management arena. And the bottom one, probably the most important. A lot of times we don't hear about a problem until it gets to be, or about an issue until it's a problem. In some cases, we don't hear about it until it's a big problem. Well, then it takes a big solution to fix the big problem. If we can catch it on the front end and share it across the state, we'll be in a lot better shape. What's going on in Texas right now, to be honest, is the absolute vanguard of what's going on in the nation. In terms of the SUSE score stuff, that is something that's been wrestled with and utilization with every state across the union. Studies have been done looking at averages and what's the right amount. Is it a standard? Is it a goal? How can you use it? How can you apply it? How do you have, and nobody's really caught it. And we probably don't have it 100% yet, but we've got some built-in reviews for it, and we'll go over that. But it's captured the attention. I got a call from Northern Michigan University a couple weeks ago. Now, for those of you who don't know where it's at, if you look at Michigan looks kind of like that, and you go way up to the top part up here, and then the next thing is Lake Superior. That's Michigan Tech University in Houghton. And they called and said, we had called and talked to some of the people at the University of Wisconsin. They said that they were looking at the stuff you guys were doing in Texas, that it was really cutting-edge stuff. And that's not because of what we do. We just kind of put together the stuff. It's really the ideas that are coming out of the institutions, and that's critical, and we want to keep going with that. And that's what this forum is for, and that's exactly what it is, a forum. Slide, please. Okay, you can take a quick look at the agenda. You can see the 50 minutes, 10 minute. We're going to talk about the facilities inventory and the changes. A little bit of the background. The space use efficiency, which replaced utilization, or we call it SUE. Paul's going to talk about the construction cost methodology and replacement value calculations and some of the direction we go with that. Then we're going to talk about some of the upcoming reviews that we're going to look at, most notably the space model. That's huge, and it's going to be quite an extended review. But there are other things. And then there's probably the most important part is, what are the things you think we need to review? From your institutional perspectives, what things do you think we need to take a look at? And we've got some things from yesterday, and then we'll get your ideas, and we'll put all those together, because that's absolutely critical. Slide, please. Okay. Any questions so far? If you have any questions at any time and jump around, as long as we don't jump around too much, that's fine. But we really, again, want to keep this in as open a form as we can. Okay, changes. About 4 years ago, there are meetings at one of the institutions that to talk about the facilities inventory manual. That there are issues, there are pieces of data that weren't used for anything. There was detail that wasn't required. There was data in there that people really had no idea why it was there. So we needed to change it. Well, that was one of those cases where you had all these ideas and said, yeah, well, let's change it. Okay, great. And then that kind of ended it from the institutions. And then got together again, and the NCES, or National Center for Educational Statistics, publishes a national manual. And we took that manual and merged it and aligned the Texas manual to the greatest extent possible with that, because it gives better uniformity in terminology, It gives and some more alignment across, so we can use other institutions' data for benchmarking, those kind of things, or other states. One of them that I still don't have captured, but I'm working on it, is the difference between room type and usage code. We used to call room type was classroom or class lab. Now that is space use. And you'll see that term in your manuals. Usage code is functional category code. Now, no change to those two other than the name, but that's very important as you're looking at aligning data from other states or from the federal government who is using the NCES. Historically, previously, room dimensional data were sent. And you had Dimension 1, Dimension 2, Alcove 1, Alcove 2, 3, 4, and all these data. Now, it's room area, and that's determined by the institution. The National Center for Educational Statistics model states that the most accurate... Let me get rid of my phone, which seems to be bleeding out. States that the most accurate way of determining room area is through electronic drawings. Of course, those drawings need to be verified. Okay, you can't just take an as-built drawing and say, yep, that's good, because there's a lot of problems with that too, but you still have to verify. But as far as that area, so the room area is going to be reported instead of dimensional data. The data fields have been expanded. As you can see, the building number to 6 characters, previously it was 4, and room number to 16, when previously it was 7. And I was on the group as part of an institutional rep. I thought 16, wow. I mean, write that one down on a schedule. You know, that's like a VIN number on a car. But some institutions use those. They have other terms that they use for the rooms, but their actual room number that they use in their data. So anyways, there are 16 numbers in there. And some additional information. First of all, the floor. The manual has the protocol for assigning the floor number, whether it's in the actual number, whether it's basement, mezzanine, first floor, second floor, and there's a diagram in there. Be careful, especially with your CAD text on this, because the level of a drawing does not always correspond to the floor of a drawing. Okay? Because quite often level 1 is actually the ground or maybe the basement. I can't remember. I always got them mixed up too. But be careful and use the protocols that are listed in the manual. It's very easy. Additionally, zip code. This was something for years. How are we going to geographically attribute the data, whether it's activity or whether it's inventory data, to show where it really is that building? Some campuses may have their main campus, and we'll kind of jump ahead and talk a little bit about utilization or SUE. Their main campus, their utilization or SUE score may be quite low, but they have a branch campus that's absolutely busting at the seams. I mean, they can't fit another room in there. So when a project would go forward and they say we need more classroom space at this branch campus, well, those data would be, if it wasn't a system center, would be attributed back to the main institution because we didn't know. We didn't have the data to say where that building was. Well, now we can actually take those data, and as a project comes forward, we can actually do a zip code attribution of the SUE or activity on the campus. So we can look and see, is that branch campus, that area? And we can use some mapping tools and things like that once we have the zip code data. Now, remember one thing, this is the physical zip code of the building, not the campus center zip code. Okay? Because many mailing zip codes for a campus might all be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it goes into a central mail system and distributes out. But there are several zip codes within the area. Use the physical zip code of the building, and that will allow us to drop those into areas that are fairly refined areas. Some other information, eliminated capital investment. Those data are sent with annual financial report and other things. It didn't go anywhere. It was a really cool data field that some of them were really awesome, like 200,000 square feet capital investment, $10. And because we didn't use it, nobody really looked at it, and it was pointless. Building perimeter. As best I understand from history, there was a landscaping formula that you used your building perimeter for to determine what the amount of linear external feet for landscaping, etc. That's gone in history, so there was no sense having those data, and we've eliminated them. And I don't know if anybody's doing this, but it's a point of caution. I think some institutions were using the building perimeter and multiplying times the number of floors to get their gross area. That's an extraordinarily bad idea. Because not all floors were created equal. And all those vertical penetrations between floors, you might have a lecture hall that actually goes 2 floors. That area within that second floor is eliminated from the gross and things like that. So it's one of those, if you get in the weeds, I think there perhaps are institutions that are doing that, and we definitely want to caution. So that data isn't even there anymore. So again, we want to get to the actual thing. And the building construction type. There's a lot of discussion about this, to follow the engineering codes and that kind of thing. But then it came down to, okay, what's it used for? We weren't. It was great information that it was a masonry building or, wood frame or whatever, but we didn't use it. So, therefore, that field is eliminated. In sum, we eliminated more information than we added. That's at the bottom line. When you get down to it, we eliminated more pieces of data than we added to the actual inventory manual. This will go into effect. The new reporting will go into effect this fall. Okay, that will go into effect this fall. And we talked about it yesterday. Some of you may have already set up your databases if you looked ahead and looked at it and said, and if you were at TCUF, and we had the similar discussion. The slides should look really familiar. I've already started looking at aligning those fields. Torsia and Doug are developing the programming information to actually start receiving those reports and start getting those test data ahead of time. Okay? Ma'am. Okay, the question, and if I repeat a question, if you don't have the mic, that's just so our television audience can get the pleasure of the question. The question is, why did we leave the fields just as omitted? I think that's a good idea on a couple things, because we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, and there may be a new piece of data that we need at some point that we now have an available field to drop into that area. Yes, it does make the field length longer, I agree. Again, Torsia, if you want to weigh in on that at all. Okay, so an informative measure also that there was something there and it's not there anymore. Okay, and another question, please.
You had mentioned another meeting, was it TCUF, that had already occurred?
Yes.
How can we go about doing a better job of getting the correct people to these meetings? Because I would have loved to have had a better heads up, and apparently the word didn't get to me.
Okay. In terms of TCUF, Texas Colleges and University Facilities Conference, that's kind of its own organization. And they have an annual conference, and as a matter of fact, Jennifer is on the advisory board, so I'm sure that at break, if you get with her and make sure you get her information, she can forward that on to the president. It's Hector Gonzalez down in San Antonio. So, and those are really great conferences. I think the next one is in Lubbock, and the 6th, 7th, and 8th of 2010.
I'll go ahead and pass around just a little thing. I think most of y'all might already be on it, but if you did not receive information about TCUF that was held in January, just add your name to this and we'll make sure to get you an email.
Now, TCUF, again, we participate, we support it wholeheartedly. We don't run it. So, and I think that's a good thing. It allows a really better forum without that air of, it's the coordinating board doing it and all that kind of thing. But it was an excellent conference, and all indications are it's going to be better, especially with Texas Tech is going to give free football tickets to all attendees, right? Oh, they're not? Oh, no, wait, it's one of those new skyboxes on the East Stadium edition. That's what it is. Yeah, but if Mike's listening to this, he's probably throwing stuff to his computer right now. Yes, please.
The new format, I'm sure it's on the internet, but the new format.
Yes. Okay, the question is the new formatting. It's actually in the manual. And if you didn't get one, that is online. And we're going to try to get everybody enough copies for everybody today. We thought we had enough, but we're not sure. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of a specific, kind of detailed suggestion about the format. I feel like something, like, for instance, about floors. I always have floors in my database. You've got it for two characters. Oh, you have it here for two characters, and through my experience, 3 is a better way of going. Because we've had, in different universities I've been at, there have been times, believe it or not, where we might have had a mezzanine in the basement level, and so we needed 3 characters, or we'd have interlibrary stacks. So that kind of suggestion, who do I send this to?
What we're planning to do, and in fact, when we did this manual revision, we were looking at and doing that probably every other year. And looking at that, like the Sue, when we get into that, we've built in on the front end a triennial review. So it's kind of hard to, any kind of changes like that would be really widespread are something that we'd bring to that next group that we put together for that.
I'm asking a process question. Is there a flow of a particular email that then launches?
Yeah, you can send it to me. You can send it to Jennifer, Paul, Torsia. I mean, there's a lot. We will get that. The main thing is we probably won't make a change like that without putting together an advisory group and making sure we get the most widespread input on that because something like that, while it may be an excellent idea, can really throw a lot of things off if not everybody's informed well in advance. Okay? But, okay? I trust that answer. Okay. Any other questions? That's what this is about.
We're going to zero fill the omitted fields.
Torsia? Quite the zero or blank.
Okay.
0 or blank. Okay? Any others before we go on? Please.
I noticed in the our reporting notebook here, okay, it says that if we were certified before November 1st, we can use the old format. Is that?
That's for last year's reports because we certify
Somewhere.
on 1 November for next year. So I think those are people that are sending in updates, like if they send them in now, you're sending them in the other format, but after November 1st when you certify. And I think I'd like to touch on that real quick. There's a time we submit the report and, we get it run and we send one in and it kicks back with errors. Well, it's still not sent in, because it has errors. And all the errors have to be worked off and the certification on November 1st. Okay, the certification by the CEO or the CFO, essentially that the data contained therein are correct to the best of his or her knowledge, essentially what it says. That's November 1st for the certified data. So if you're waiting to send the first data on November 1st, I've ran quite a few of these, you get errors. And you have to go in and go, what? Oh, a little hiccup, and you have to do that. Now, it doesn't mean the data contained therein are correct. It just means the format. It's kind of a joke. Someone actually told me. He said, no, that's absolutely correct. I ran it. It had no errors. Cool. No, that means the format of the report. The data might be completely wrong. But, so, any other questions? Okay, good stuff. Hit a slide. Okay, issues. Again, timeliness, reporting, and certifications. Absolutely critical. We're going to meet our statutory deadline for the submission of the final reports. That's going to happen. And we're going to look at those reports, and there's a date. And we are going to make every effort to get it to you all for review and comment as fast as we can get it done. Again, if we're waiting on reports, we just cannot do it. And then the other part is reopening the reports. Send a report, okay, good, got it, no errors. And then a little later you send it, oh, I need to reopen. Well, essentially that resets the clock in many cases because that data changes, hence that populates through all the models. Now, sometimes it's very quick, sometimes it's huge. Again, that just crunches that time for institutional review because we're going to meet our deadlines, okay? And that's to produce these reports. Room capacity. When we talk about the SUSE score, you're going to see that room capacity has a whole new meaning. Up until recently, it really wasn't used for anything. I don't know of any report that used capacity up until that point. Well, so I think it's very possible institutions were making a swag or an estimate at the size of a classroom, or they might have used planning numbers. We estimate 40 square feet per student station. It's 2,000 square feet. Area 50. Well, that may or may not be accurate. Reality might not meet that because in doing the SUSE, one of the factors is percent fill. That's going to be comparison of the capacity that's shown on your inventory and the actual number of students that are enrolled in any given section that is reported on the CBM 005. So if those capacity numbers are off, then the percent fill will be off. So this data is now used. Now for the health-related folks out there, don't worry about that. You still need to update your stuff too. I'm not letting you off the hook, especially you. Okay. No, but seriously, and I know you do, and I know everybody does a great job on that. But really pay a lot closer, because a lot of times we do an estimate. We look, 50, okay, 150. Check it off, okay? Well, it might actually be 120. That's going to have a substantial impact on your overall numbers when it comes time for the percent fill. So again, that's a data point that has not been used previously for anything, but is now being used. Okay, one of the things we send out and have sent out is a project update for all your capital projects that are approved but not online. Send an update. What's the status of this project? Is it online yet? Is it complete? Well, we're going to send that out again, but it's going to be more of a companion report to the 11 and 14, which is your room and building reports. Because what we want to do is reconcile the books. That if, at one point in time, Space Model said, you have 1 million square feet and 100,000 approved not online. Okay? Hence, 1.1 million. Well, it comes up on project time, and you say, yes, this project is complete, and it's 50,000 square feet. Well, that leaves a vacant 50,000 square feet somewhere. Or on the other side of it, you could say, no, this is not complete, yet part of it's been occupied. Perhaps it's a modular type deal, and part of it's been occupied. And so you've got 50,000 square feet that the inventory folks have put on the inventory, yet the report comes back and it shows that there's 100,000 square feet approved not online. That's going to decrease your deficit by 50,000 square feet. So there's a lot of opportunities. We try to look at space like money, and so all we're trying to do is reconcile the books. And in one model, you've got this much actual and this much approved not online, and over time, as this gets online, we want to be able to transfer it and make sure we balance the books. So we're going to make those close to companion reports. Another one, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but that's okay, is a project closeout. Having done a lot with the GSA type things, when you finish out in substantial completion, or you punch list a building, there's a closing report that you submit. This was our actual expenditures. When Paul talks about the construction costs and how we've changed that, we're going to try to use actual construction numbers, not estimates, or not the project approved numbers, but the actual numbers of construction. We will get that from you from a closeout report. The actual form of that is to be announced. We're going to make it as parsimonious as possible. So it's actually limits, and it should be data that's already available within your construction management process. That has to be reported in other ways anyways, but we want to make sure that we get accurate data so that we can use good numbers for construction progress. Okay? Yes?
Does the project update come from the MP1? This is a separate report? We're going to do an 11 and a 14 on our project.
No. Let me clarify then here. You've got an 11 and 14. That's your actual space inventory. Historically, and usually it's an Excel spreadsheet that was sent out with a list of, here are your approved not online projects, and what's their status, essentially. Okay? Well, we're going to have that same thing, and usually it's been sent out in February, in that time frame. We're going to send those out about the same time period in November, October, November, as the 11 and 14, so that that can be reconciled on the campus before it gets to us. One of the overriding things that we're trying to do, and it has been done, a lot of great folks, but one of the focuses we're trying to do is no matter what we do, we want to make it as easy as possible for you folks to replicate it at the campus. No matter what model it is, no matter what system or whatever, that you can actually take and go, okay, let me do this on mine and see what happens. So especially if, say you're sending forward a project request, and we use zip codes and construction costs or whatever, that you can actually go in, see that zip code, our process, and it's spelled out simple enough that, now it's simple enough, I mean, you're all smart people, but, when you transmit something like that, it gets a little bit confusing, that you can take it, actually run those numbers, and know what the answer is before it asks, because when we get this stuff, that's what we do. And we definitely don't want to have any mysterious email saying, well, what do you mean? No, it was 45. No, it's 73. No, it's 45. No, who's on first? I don't know. That just expands the approval timeline on projects and the transaction costs of doing so. Okay? Another thing we're looking to, and this is coming out of the board, they want a construction, with your project on your request, a construction timeline from design, construction, all the way through, and specified dates on that. So when we get those annual updates, it'll update where are you along the construction timeline. So are you on glide path? And that's data that the Strategic Planning Committee and senior executive staff according to want to know. Is everything progressing along the construction timeline? Very reasonable question. Or is it dropped behind for some reason? Or is it accelerated for some reason? Okay? And that will help to help us to get a better understanding of construction costs because they shift. And Paul will go into that. And the other part is, if there are issues that a building came on as a construction project or capital project of 100,000 square feet, and we see, they say, yep, it's complete, it's in the inventory. We look at the inventory, and it's 150,000 square feet. That gives us some time before we hit the space model publish point to actually fix it, to say, hey, give a call. Most of the time we call, we'll say, are you sure? It's like that button on your computer. You're about to delete this file. Are you sure? And that's all we're asking. Are you sure? We're not challenging you. We're not questioning. Are you sure? Because we see this. Are you sure that's correct? That's the only reason for it. Okay? So that's another reason for it. So if there is some issue, or perhaps it was 100,000 square feet, actually come up on 20,000 square feet on the inventory, and you say, yep, we're done. And we say, okay, wait a minute, we're missing something here. We're supposed to have 100,000 beans in the pot, we got 20. So where are they? Where's the rest? And a lot of times it's coming or whatever else. So again, it gives us a good ability to assist and look at things over time. Okay, any questions on this? Feel free, Dilip, sir.
What's the commission's goal in getting this information?
Okay, the question is, what's the goal on getting the information on schedule on the timeline? Well, I'm kind of jumping into Paul's, but part of it is when we discount and adjust for the construction costs and actually adjust it to today's dollars for the construction costs, we need to know where the midpoint of construction is going to be. And that way we can use the factors. Paul will talk about those and inflating those. And other parts is that's data that the Strategic Planning Committee has wanted to see, and we serve as an arm of them.
They're not going to get into something down the pipe where they say, okay, you're 10% behind on schedule, so you come back to the board.
I have not heard anything that even resembles that. So I would have to say no. But again, my Karnak the Magnificent skills aren't that great. But I would have to say there's been no discussion of that, and I've not heard that mentioned. That if you have a project that's well behind and, red flag, if it's a year or whatever behind, then, maybe, hey, what's going on? Perhaps that, but, I've heard nothing about a rule change to say if you're more than 6 months behind schedule, you must submit for reapproval. I've heard nothing along those lines. Okay. Any other questions? Believe me, folks, we don't want to come in and manage your projects. Please, no. That's way too much fun, and we wouldn't want to take that away from you all. And we have no intention to. We don't want to. It's just a matter of an information flow. Part of the overall thing with information is, we can get tons of it. I got a phone that can hold 100 filing cabinets of information, and it's all right there. Well, we don't want to use all that. We just want to be able to, focus that and reduce the administrative burden on the institutions to the greatest extent. So everything that we go forward with, we try to leverage existing reports to the best we can, because I know that making an administrative demand or administrative burden on the part of an institution, while it doesn't seem like a big deal to me, I do know that that's a lot bigger deal than it seems, and involves a lot more people than are just sitting in this room. Yes? 1 second. Let her get the mic, please. Well, that's okay.
We just have a policy where we have a cutoff. Anything that's completed October 31st goes into the CB11 report for the November 1 certification. But if I have a project that's completed October 20th, do I need to work to get that in if you're going to do the comparison of square footage?
You would need to indicate, and that's a very good question. And if you didn't hear, if you've got one that's right on the wire, essentially, that project complete on October 25th, and that we just want to know that it exists, because in the space model, it's still going to roll over. We just want to know that yes, it's complete. It's complete on this date. Will not be available for inventory addition on the November 1st date, and that's just a communication mechanism. Then we can look and see, okay, that's understandable. As long as if it's under 200,000 square feet, I think 2 days to inventory should be plenty. I'm kidding. That was a joke, folks. That was a joke. I know a lot of folks were, oh, no, I understand. But again, that's just a communication mechanism where in that you would say completed on, but not available, no time to inventory by that, or whatever the case may be. Okay? Very good point. And those are the kind of themes that we'd really like to hear from you all. And because in any system, there are seams. And there are gaps and things like that. Okay? Any other questions? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and take a break real quick. It's fun. Okay, well, is there anything else anybody would like to bring up for discussion? I know a lot of folks came up to me with some really great questions in terms of audit stuff. One of them was, how would you report, and the timeline before that. Debbie will be having a meeting tomorrow on that to clarify some of those issues on updates. Still follows the timeline. Whenever your available update is, if it's before November 1st, you're going to use the old reporting format. If it's after November 1st, so that still stands for those of you that are going into those.
So we can't start submitting the new before November 1?
Well, coordinate with Torch, and then right now, if officially, now for test and to look at it, again, they're working on that and develop a test environment to, if that's even possible. I know Doug has been working on that, to have a test environment to send it and say, okay, I'm going to send it a test here, see how it came through. But as far as official reporting, your official reporting not until the November 1st reporting period or certification period, which doesn't mean actually November 1st. Okay, because we're going to ask you to, and that's a question we owe you. We owe you a time on it. Do you have any idea on the hot time for that? August was what we talked about yesterday, when it would be, the development would be over. Because really, this impacts 3 reports, not just the 11 and 14. It impacts the 5, because the room identification data is changed. So And in more, we will get it out as soon as we get the timeline. But your November reports, the latest, the reason I brought up the thing about if you have the audit and which format, because that'll be a confirmed. If you have a format, let's say you're being audited starting on November 1st, okay? If that's when you're starting, any updates you're sending in October, as I understand it today, will be sent in the old format because that's all we'll have the verified data for, okay? Now,
We're audited in October.
okay, so you would definitely be, that's actually your prior to that would definitely be the older format.
So we'll have time during November. I mean, we're going to be penalized if we're not invited.
We don't penalize anybody. We just don't get the data and we can't work it. Let me give this to you. We will get the definitive timeline and we will get that out to you. Again, they're still working through the bugs on it. My conception of it, and I'll get to you. My conception of it is that you guys can start sending data September 1 in the new format. How that's going to integrate with any kind of audit type stuff, we've got to get with Deb and how she wants to work that. Okay? Okay. Paul.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I'm clear on this. The inventory, the 11 and 14 that we certify on November 1 will be in the new format.
That is correct.
Okay.
No. Well,
That's kind of what I was confused about what the driving date is, if you've already been audited, new format of report. Sounds like you're saying if you're going to be audited, one of them is already kind of audited.
sure.
So is it new or old?
You've already been audited, you're just new.
Yeah, if you've already been audited, you're just sending the new format. It's no different. In November. Well, actually, October, you don't know. You're right. Okay. Again, focusing on one issue, on the inventory itself, audits notwithstanding. We will, right now we're shooting for 1 September latest to have that open and available. Is that, for that to be available for actual hard submissions of reports. Okay. If there are, and that's why we're keeping the other system up, because if there's any global problems where we just can't get it, or there's a big issue, we're going to keep parallel systems running. However, that doesn't mean, okay, forget about it, I got another year. Okay, there will have to be mitigating circumstances, and that we would approve for that.
That kind of really scares me because I'm fixing to spend a lot of money on to have my database formatted for this new system. So if you say that I've got to keep, this really making me nervous though, because
Okay, can I answer one part? You're formatting the database to format a report?
no, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm formatting the routine
Okay.
to send the data. I don't want to do this manually. I haven't done it manually
No,
since
that's
I-
good.
15, 16 years. So I want to make sure that before I spend the money to have this routine to ball my data up to send to you, do you want it, I mean, is this for before the
Yes,
November
the new
submission?
reporting format.
Because the deadline is November 1. It's not, we're not sending anything past November, right?
Right. Well, here's what, if we take something, let's say an institution can't, something, I don't know what happens. We have to be able to have a backup method of doing that. Okay?
We use both methods.
Well, here's our goal. Use the new method. Okay? In the event that there's some global catastrophic problem, and it can't, that would be a special request, and then that would be something special on the part of Torsia and the folks at EDC to be able to work through that. But that's the vast exception, not the rule. And there will be several hurdles and things like that to go through to justify that. Because what we don't want is people to say, I'm not going to do it, I'll do it another year. Now, I don't think anybody would do that, but again, I can't speak for everyone. I wish I could read minds. No, I don't. I really don't. Then I'd know. So the bottom line, before you hold that real quick here, before that, bottom line, programming, new reporting method, open September 1st, November. The audit stuff, let that handle itself. Because the fact is, the area is the area. How many people that have been audited got dinged for their dimensions being off? Raise your hand. For your dimensional data being off, or the area being off? Okay, if the area is off, that's one thing. But your alcove measurement was off. No, I don't think anybody did, because it's a room area. So it's still the area. Okay? The data contained in there is no different for those. Okay, Harry, please.
The CBM5 will be run against the updated data?
Yes, that's why I said that 5 has to be modified also for the additional characters for the building number and room number. And again, if your current metrics, I'm pretty sure they're going to make that as seamless as possible to where it'll fill if you don't change the room number to 16 characters, because you can. That's a lot of rooms, man. Please.
I know you said it several times, just make sure it's clear in my mind. September 1, new format begins and is opened up online.
That's the target date.
Okay, we
for
have 2 months to submit in that time period.
Right.
We need to have it in, that new format in by November 1.
Right. Your certification November 1.
All right, got it.
Okay. And again, the audit stuff, that'll handle, the timeline on that can be on an ad hoc basis, because that doesn't have global implications. Might have 1 or 2 institutions. We can work with that one. Okay. Rather than shifting everything. But what we want to guard against is something happens and an institution cannot submit information for whatever reason. And that certainly won't be, because we didn't want to, and that wouldn't be that wouldn't be a good thing. Okay. No, I mean, these are great. Bring them up now. These are the seams we want to know about now. So, and we've got pretty thick skin, and oh, not hair.
Okay.
No, go ahead, please. Please.
We can submit in the old format. We've got our audit coming up. Then you can run a conversion, right? That'll just convert our old to new.
Torsia?
Because there's no new fields.
Well, yes, there are, because we don't have the zip code data. We don't have the floor data. We need that's additional.
Well, the
data.
floor is optional,
Okay,
right?
well, we don't have the zip code.
Okay.
And that's not.
Well, I just got one zip code, so that's not a problem.
Okay, well,
I
congratulations.
can update the 2,600. No, 130.
Okay. Okay, but again, if you hand it off in a format that you don't know what's going to say on the other end, say, okay, you guys are going to convert it, then you're entering in an opportunity for something perhaps unsafe. But again, the data that has to be certified, run without errors, and Torsia will be your contact with that. Torsia and or Doug. Okay, any others?
Concerning the floor code, we have a multi-story building, and we run into a problem where we have duplicate room numbers, like on the first floor and the 15th floor. And with this floor code, will that solve that problem? In other words, if you say we have a building code, the same building code, same room numbers on 2 different floors. So if we have a building code, if we have a floor code now, to me that would say that now you have a new identifier.
I don't think that'll be this. I think it's still building and room. Is that not correct, Torsia?
Well, that's what I was saying. That's the reason why. But I want to make sure. It always pops up and gives me errors. And there's only a few. I don't have a lot.
Yeah, I know one of the points of performance in the PRT is that all rooms have a unique identifier. So in that case, your rooms do not have a unique identifier. You have you have a building number and a room number, correct? So you have building 1, room 101, building 1, room 101 more than once. So technically, you do not have. Okay, so well.
Why have us enter a floor code?
It was an optional piece of data that institutions wanted to have put in there. And that was part of the group that came forward that I was a member of that said we would like the floor data for the number of floors and to get a better understanding of it. But again, the descriptive characteristics of a room are the building number, room number.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is it would be nice if we also use that floor code. That would identify that room. I may be the only person here that has that problem.
I don't know. I think in my experience, it's, that normally you have a building number and a unique room number in that building. Now you can have repetitive room numbers in different buildings, or you can have and non-repetitive building numbers. But in order to specify that, you would have that building number and that room number, and that's pretty much the descriptive characteristics in terms of a building report and a room report.
Just so I can make sure I understand. So this new floor code is not going to help. I thought I was talking loud.
It is a supplemental piece of information.
Okay.
Okay. Any others? I mean, really, folks, before we move on. Okay. I'm using the force. Force it, I will. Oh, see, worked. All right. Okay. About 4 years ago, I'm guessing, a group got together at one of the institutions, got together and said, hey, utilization, we need to do something. The number isn't very good. Hardly anybody meets it. Very few people understand how it's calculated. And the exclusions, when they try to, it was very, and the response out of that meeting was, yep, we need to fix it. And I think everybody went, yeah, we need to fix it, and that's what we're saying. Well, over time, about a year and a half ago, a group of institutions and facilitated by coordinating board staff, I was on the institution side at that point, got together and said, look, let's come up with a metric to make that has more utility. And as we go through this, when I came to the coordinating board in November, at that point I had been on the institutional position on this, and then at the coordinating board position on this. One of the interesting things is I read through the historical documents on utilization. These are the same things, and without, I don't think anybody's knowledge, knowing that group, that people had talked about. We need to figure out how to integrate capacity, or number of seats, how full are the classrooms. Because under the old method alone, if you had one person in a 500-person lecture hall, you were good. It was utilized. Okay? Or if you were having to shove, 50 people in a 45-person classroom, that would be the same as having one person. There was no measure for it. So that had been talked about. In fact, study paper, I want to say 14, study paper 28, talked about things WSCH, workstation contact hours, and it was very accurate, but essentially said the same things. It's just in an interval level or a more scaled level, as opposed to what we've done here is turning it into a nominal definition. Across the nation, and we reviewed many. One of them we cite in the actual study in the documents is the SCEV study, which they looked at 20 different institutions. And there are several. Minnesota did a study. California did a study. SCEV's probably the most comprehensive. And what they found is where there are these kind of standards, they really aren't used for anything. And one of the reasons was nobody really understood what to use them for. And they knew it was important. And at a certain point in time, it's one of the discussions I was having earlier, that the idea was that your use of classrooms is the bellwether for your overall use of space. Now, is that accurate? Is that not? I think there arguments can be made both directions, that it's really not, or that it is. But regardless, we looked at and found that there really wasn't any one metric that could capture this. And we ran a lot of different permutations. I know Paul was on the group. Paul and Paul were on the group, and it went around a lot of different ways, looking at rankings. And if you're ranked like first place in something, 29th, you're like flipped, and you get flipped on your head. And of course, the driving force behind this was the actual strategic planning committee put together a task force to actually say, look at this. And they were the final decision. But again, a group of people got together and really did a great job. And this is what I got a call about, and say, hey, look, we want to see this. This is really cutting edge, because the stuff that people have, if anybody thinks this is complicated, here's what I would pose them as we go forward. The executives of an institution, that one of their biggest battles is executive overload of information. Again, we get volumes of it on our cell phones at any time. This digests it into a nominal variable. Yes, no. Made it, didn't make it. Okay, now is it perfect? Probably not. But what we need to do is get this out, see what the institutions, how they respond to things, and then assess it. So the group said at 3 years, we'll sit down and we'll look at it again and assess the different variables. And is it working, is it not, and make adjustments to them. Okay? So let's go forward. Please, slide. Okay, the guideline, which was, and that should actually say previous because this is now in the books. 38 hours per week. You know, people wondered why 38. There were, you know, different studies that say, you know, well, if you look at this many hours and this many this and put it together, and pretty much nationally, anywhere from 40 to 35 was the number. And class lab at 25, that's pretty close nationally, the number, and the same ideas behind it. One of the problems with it is it only considered activities that were scheduled in those classrooms, class labs. As was brought up at break the discussion, that's a very small percentage of overall campus space, 5 to 10% at best of all overall space on campus. Okay, so, but it only considered the activities held in that 5 to 10%. The reality is there are a lot of good reasons that classes aren't held in classrooms, but the metric just washed it. The previous metric, like they didn't exist. Okay, or vice versa. There are good reasons why a doctoral level lab course would be held in a research lab. Wow, I wonder why. Well, there's a good reason for that. Again, it wouldn't capture that. It's gone. Okay, and so how do you capture that? Well, the first thing that I think the group started, there were, you know, looked at the one measure, then there were 10 measures, and kind of distilled it down into 3 different measures. And we use these multiple measures to determine the score. Okay, that consider in one variable or another all your academic activities or all activities reported on the CBM 005. If you report it on the 005, it will count somewhere in this formula in one variable or another. Okay. The standard, as written into the board rules, only applies to the projects that make sense to apply it. If you have a project that comes forward that says it's primary classroom space, then the classroom score would be used to determine whether or not that project goes on the consent calendar. Okay? This, with the addition of the zip code data that you provide, we can use that and do zip code level utilization or SUE scoring. Now, we won't do that on a routine basis. Why? I have never counted how many zip codes are occupied by higher education. I don't plan to, but I know I could. If I said a lot, that would probably be an understatement. But on an ad hoc basis, as they come forward, we will look at it and pull those up, pull those data. Plus, it gives you the initial information in the project request to say, although the institutional SUE score may be 165 or 74 or whatever, in this zip code, or isolating for this zip code, just those buildings in that zip code, hence rooms in that zip code, our SUE score would be 198. So it allows us to do that. Okay? And then there are some projects that don't really fall into any of them, and are either classroom or class lab, and then we have an overall score. Okay, slide please. Okay, the utilization rate, that's identical to the existing methodology. Okay? Essentially taking the activities that are in classrooms for classroom utilization, the activities that are scheduled in classrooms, not stacked, that are fundable courses, or then the number of minutes are summed in an entire week, and then that aggregate number on the campus of minutes is divided by 50 per hour, and then the number of classrooms. Okay. Now, if everybody didn't get that, it's cool. It automatically calculates, and I'll get with you offline and go whatever detail you want. Your CBM 005 report that you send, that feedback has it on there. It automatically calculates it. That number has not changed. That's the same number as has been used. Demand is a little different. Demand takes into account all of your activities that are taught. If your activity is taught in some kind of lab, any 200 series room, as indicated on your CBM 005, those minutes, calculated very similar, stacking is not excluded. It's just getting a total number of classes go into the lab pile, or in the case of the 200 series rooms. In the other rooms, 680s, 350s, 310s, 110s, all those go into the classroom pile, because those are activities that by nature do not require special equipment. Okay? As long as it's on the CBM 005. And that number of minutes divided by 50 for the hour by your number of classrooms, without regard to where they're taught, gives you a demand measure. An easy way to picture it is if you had a bunch of classes with no campus, and you took those numbers, how many classrooms do we need? And you looked at it, that would pretty much tell you this, how many classrooms we need to reach that level of activity. And it would tell you could do the backwards math. Essentially, it's a global planning mechanism. Percent fill. This is, again, all of this is off your 005. And one of the things that the group had started with and stayed with was the fact that we didn't want any new reports from the institutions. So whatever we're going to use had to be existing data. And it certainly was. And this is all off the CBM 005. So if you look at the total enrollment in a course, any given instance, compared to the capacity of the room, that gives you a percent that activity fills a room. That aggregate average percent gives you your average percent fill by room type. And that's just in classrooms or class labs. So essentially, if you look at the three measures, one, utilization rate tells you the historical measure of how well you're actually, how many hours per week those classrooms or class labs are being used. The demand rate tells you how many classrooms or class labs your institution needs. And that the percent fill says how full are you filling them, or how big of classrooms do you need. Now some, and you can look at the numbers, are not at the point they want to be. Well, what does this mean? Well, it means you have to present to the board. Now, that involves some travel, and I understand that's, time is money, and that's absolutely true. Okay? But it was going to be a standard. If we stayed with the utilization rate, there would be a lot more that would do it. But it gives you the information you need to focus on. Perhaps you have a classroom. You say, look, we have our utilization rate is excellent. Our demand rate is excellent. But our percent fill is not so great. And I'm just pulling it. However, this project is going to build 10 smaller classrooms to fit these, retrofit the old large classrooms that we don't use into other types of space. Therefore, at the end of this, we would have this kind of rate, and it would help that. There's no requirement that the project, like a space deficit, that the project would eradicate. If you came with a space surplus, you have to explain how this project would remove the space surplus. There's no requirement for that. All it says in the action plan is that how will you improve?
So actually, the example you gave is the reverse is exactly true of the village, where many of the classrooms were built in the 50s, 40s, 60s, all tiny, and that absolutely made use. We stratified our utilization study, and found anything over 70 is getting great use, and anything below that is getting absolutely abysmal use. So what I hear you saying is that even though we may have an overall score that's below what's optimal, the CB and the board will consider the fact that we are only building larger size classrooms to meet the demand, and they're looking at changing out the others into other things like that.
Sure. I mean, and that's the idea. These data inform, really what they should do is inform the building programming design process. What do we really need? That's what, in the end, that's what they should do.
So then the obvious is that we, as an institution, need to do the stratified analysis to look at cohorts with the sizes to get that kind of data.
Well, the question is, would the institutions need to do this stratified? I don't know that. I'm not going to tell the institution how or what the A answer is, because there are several answers that I've never even thought of. I think that's one possibility. that you can look and say, look, we've done an analysis. Here's our rooms that don't. This is how we're going to get rid of these, add these. I think that's great information. There may be other things. I certainly don't want to put it in the box and say that is the answer. I think that is an answer. But there are many different questions. But again, this focuses if those rooms that you have are really full. And a real simple example: you've got your rooms are at 98% average percent fill. Your demand is low, or relatively low, and your utilization is relatively low, and they're pretty much a match. Well, that's saying you're putting all your classes in your classrooms. I mean, that's what it's saying. We looked at all the classes, and if we put them all, it would be there. So those match, but they're full. So what it's saying is you've got very few classrooms, but you're filling them up. So what's the answer to that? I think there's several conclusions that could be drawn out of that, and I certainly won't limit any. But that's where the real, I think, power in this metric is to be able to look at the data and to be able to make it, to where the institution can use it. One of the questions that came up for the committee was, is this information usable at a campus? And the resounding answer was yes. It's very useful in the routine administration. So these are data that not only are used for this, but could be used on the campus to inform your scheduling process, to help with your facilities, who goes where. We have this huge space model that says how much, and it gives a global, an aggregate. You have a deficit of, Houston, for example, is huge. The deficit is like 900,000 square feet. So where is that deficit resting? I mean, that's part of your deal in sending forward the project request and framing the discussion and the responses. So, because it gives you where the areas are to answer the questions. Ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, in the aggregate, because you have some exactly. Do we consider classes that are over 100%? Yes. For instance, you have a class where the capacity says 20, but the average percent fill is 25. They drag 5 chairs. We all know that would never happen on an institution. They would never move chairs from one classroom to another. Well, I know better than that. That happens routinely. Yes, in the aggregate, usually those wash out.
What's rejected on the 005?
No. No.
My second question is how you actually calculate the average. Do you count all the enrollments divided by all the capacities, or do you find the percentage at the classroom level and average the percentage?
Yes, average the percentages. The average percentage fill. Okay. We don't want to go forward if there's any questions out there, so please ask. Yes?
You can have more than 100% enrollment in a lower capacity room on the CBM-5?
Yeah, there's no cross-check for the capacity on the
I thought that was rejected as a mistake.
Torsia, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no cross-check on that. They're two different reports.
No?
The balance between the 5 and the 11 and 14 is the actual room data, correct? That they have to match. The room types have to match. So you have to have a room.
I've been away a while. So
all right, no problem, man. Hey,
that's changed.
We're good. Ma'am.
At my campus, we're usually majority of evening school, where majority of our courses start at 4 o'clock. And pretty much we're a little concerned that we might not ever be able to meet this with the demand of our courses being in the evening and not pretty much an all-day institution. I mean, did you look at that, or do you see that as being a problem, or?
And it's an excellent question, really, and it goes to kind of the changing, if you read some of the different literature, the face of higher education and how is it changing, going to the lifelong learners, the evening courses, and that sort of thing. There's really not an easy answer for that. In fact, that's one of the things, and I'll touch on something ahead of time, HB 746, if any of you read it, that was essentially a bill sponsored by one of the representatives, obviously, that says any institution of higher, originally in its initial state, any institution of higher education can go to any other institution of higher education and use their classrooms for core curriculum, then the host institution cannot charge and cannot refuse. Now, that was the original. That permitted. The one that is before the governor now states an institution of higher education may make its classrooms available at those times, and that they can charge a rate that they would get if they were hosting that course. So how much would that adjust their infrastructure formula for their modeled amount of space, which that's going to be a very minor amount. And if they make it available, they have to make it available for the whole semester. Now, there were a couple permutations in there that were a little rough, that required some reporting. That first of all, the definition of institution of higher education, that means everybody. Community colleges, junior colleges, senior colleges, health-relateds, extension centers, anywhere. If you had a classroom, just walk in, okay, thanks, I'll take that one. And you can't say no. Okay? And so that kind of got defined more. Also, there was a reporting requirement that we would have to provide a study after every semester on all the institutions of higher, essentially all the institutions of higher education. So we'd have to get inventories on institutions we currently don't, community colleges. And we'd have to do utilization studies for health-relateds, for community colleges, junior colleges, extension centers, and we'd have to do it 4 times a year. And we'd have to analyze it by time of day, day of the week. And institutions would have to report all the extra activities that were going on, such as student group A was using this classroom for such and such, and Professor Jones had a tutorial, a staff meeting. All that data would have to be collected and sent to us. It was huge. While I understand the idea behind it, and it is admirable that if it's not being used, well, let's all get together and play with the toys well together and co-locate. It's that kind of idea that classrooms generally are not full at night that is prevalent. But the institutions, and that's a very example, Curly, primarily a commuter-type campus that is really full at night. Well, perhaps your score won't reach that 175, but you just said exactly what would need to be said in presentations, that while we don't have this score low, again, in 3 years, once we look at it, both, we get it out there, institutional behavior will change. Naturally, that's just what happens. And then to see the impact of both of those, and then that'll take about 3 years for us to then go back and look, okay, how is this working? What needs to be shifted? Left, right, up, down. And that may very well be one of those things that needs to be shifted. But right now, I do see your point, and there are a lot of other individuals. One of the other things that was brought up and we're looking at right now is for the institutions that submit a OOC for continuing education. Right now, that's not reported on the CVN 005. We can take those data, and I've met with Doug Parker on this. We can integrate those data into the demand measure because there's no set, it's not a semester-long course. It might be 2 weeks long, or it might be 3 weeks, or it might breach over different areas. But we can look at that impact and kind of mathematically spread it out over the semester to see how it impacts average for demand. Unfortunately, the data contained in the C report are not robust enough. They don't have the essential data to use them for utilization, but they can be used for demand. If you submit a OOC, which I'm not sure U of H Downtown submits a OOC. I don't know if they do or not. I haven't verified. They very well may. We're in the process of kind of permuting those data, but in some institutions' case, it might have a marginal impact. In others, it may have a significant impact depending on the amount of time is spent with those courses. But again, we can look at that and mathematically kind of smooth that out to make it look like in the math that it happened the entire semester. Okay, any other questions on the calculation? Ma'am. Right, right for this coming year, it won't. For future years, we'll have to see what our programming load's like, and it's like it's just, people get busy, but we'll produce a report as soon as we get the data. I mean, we'll have that out. As soon as we get all the 5 certified, it'd be, what, an hour? That's.
So this is past now.
Yeah, this is it. This is it. With a mutual understanding, there would be a 3-year review of these data. Now, one of the other things, there's more to it. I just want to make sure we got this down before we went forward. These numbers are then put into a scale. Okay, essentially the data are grouped, and a point is assigned, or point total is assigned for that group. Again, in using an interval variable or something like that, if you have a number that's way low, it can eradicate any chance of success. So by grouping it and putting it into ordinal levels, or in terms of ordinal variables, it mitigates that large-scale impact. And then a weighting factor is multiplied by each of those to come up with a 100-point total. Right now, demand is weighted at 9, utilization at 8, and percent fill at 8. Are those the optimal numbers? Again, we ran, I think, 2 different scenarios in the working group. Didn't really do a whole lot. In fact, one institution, it didn't do well and it didn't work out. So the idea is, and what the group came forward with is, okay, fine, let's look at it in 3 years. Fred Heldenfeld, the chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, said absolutely. But one of the things the weighting factor does nicely, it helps provide a strategic focus. In 5 years or 2 years or 1 year, whenever, there's a decision that, you know what, filling up classrooms, and I have no idea, but I'm just bringing it up, filling up classrooms is the most important thing. We can adjust the weighting factor without adjusting the rest of the model. Or if, you know what, utilization rate is the most important. Again, we can shift those weights to properly indicate that strategic focus. Okay? So, and then that gives you your 75 points maximum, or 100-point maximum for class lab and classroom SUE score. We always laughed that the SUE idea was not Susan Brown's idea. It wasn't named after her. It just fit. So, okay. Any other questions on it? Sure.
Utilization.
Mm-hmm.
You up the classrooms to 45 hours, class 35?
Just for demand. That's the demand rate. The utilization stays at 38 and 25. That gives you the maximum point. That and above gives you the maximum number of points. And this list, now in the end, it comes down into a nominal measurement. Either you meet it or you don't. Ranking, while we can rank them, it really doesn't matter. I mean, you could be, if everybody's really bad, you could be number 2 and still don't meet it. So, some folks wanted to have it ranked, and that's great. There are a lot of ties. That's okay. We can do that. But the idea is that it provides a standard. One of the things that I know the group wrestle with is that if you're using something that is moving every year in a comparative measure, we kind of run into the same issues that some people see with perhaps HEAF, where you can get really, you can get better, but if everybody else gets really a lot better, you end up really getting worse. So, when anytime your success is judged by the actions, you create a zero-sum game. And we want to make it a positive sum game where everybody can meet the standard. And that's the bottom line, okay? But if we put a comparative measure in there, one of the problems would be is that somebody's not going to. Same thing with rank. We say you must be ranked in the top 10. Somebody's going to be 11. One of the concerns was, well, what if you're just below the line? Well, that's the thing with standards. I mean, it's just below the line, right? I mean, no matter where you move the line to, somebody's going to be just below the line, unless you put it underneath everybody, and then you kind of you eliminate any purpose of having it.
How does it change as far as how many people meet the standard now compared to before?
The last count, we had 5 institutions in making utilization and the classroom, and we had, I think, 10 Met Class Lab. With this, we had 12 in our initial run, and I haven't looked at the most recent, but We had 12, or better than a third, of the institutions made the classroom. Over half met the class lab, and then about half made the overall. So it actually expanded those that were in compliance. If we just taken utilization at 35, 38, 25, but in a very small field, actually expanded that out and gave more opportunities to get better. That way, you can only do one thing: put more classes in classrooms. Put more classes in classrooms. If anybody's done this for a while, has probably heard that on their campus. Got to put more classes in classrooms. Got to put more classes in classrooms. Not teaching enough Friday classes. That's the answer. The answer is we're not teaching enough Friday classes. You know, and perhaps that's the case. Or someone walks up and says, you know, I walked down the hallway and I didn't see anybody using any of those classrooms. Well, what time was it? About 4 o'clock on Friday. Yeah. Yeah, sure, I'll go with that. And then we have those surge times. One of the other points that was brought up was, you know, to account for that surge period. You know, and in an optimization solution, you know, when you get that surge, you always have those areas outside the curve, below the standard and outside the curve. That's your opportunities. So the more you crunch that peak in there in the center, the more area you give for optimization. So if you just shoved everything at noon, then you need a lot of classrooms. And so, you know, we're going to look at day of the week and time of day distribution in the future and see how that balances out. I know when I was at Tech, I did a study of all the classes. In fact, I called Torsia and I said, Torsia, I need all the institutions CVM 005s. And she said, what for? And I'm insane, and I did. Funny thing was, about every institution was about the same. There really wasn't a whole lot of difference between them. Some taught a few more night classes than others, but generally they all pretty much followed the same pattern. Time of day, day of the week, and that sort of thing. Okay. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and I talked through that. The next slide. Okay, key thing, does not require additional reporting, and it focuses the action plans. We talked about all that, and it adds resolution to the existing rate measure. It actually gets more detail. Okay, fine, you're putting you're filling up all the classes. You've got classes in all the classrooms. Your utilization rate is 45 hours per week. Outstanding. How many people are in those classes? Well, we're filling up 50-person with 10 people rooms. Great. Wouldn't it make more sense from the utility standpoint, maintenance standpoint, to put those 10 people in a 10-person conference room that could really do a great job? Many of the professors would want that anyway. Well, yeah, but if we do that, we'll lose it for utilization. This measure, you won't lose it because you'll still get it on the demand measure. And it allows you to, you know, in air handlers, if you want to focus your classes and get them in certain air handler zones so you can shut down others during those hot times of day, or cold, depending on where you're at. Normally here in Texas, it's the hot times of day. And again, it right sizes, you know, the whole concept of supply economy, supply discipline. Use things in the appropriate amount. You know, don't spend $100 for something when you can get it for $50. Don't use a 100-person classroom when you can use a 50. Or don't use a 50-person classroom when you use a 10-person conference room. And as long as we don't provide a disincentive towards people using good economy, then I think we're doing pretty good. And I really got to applaud the working group. They did a great job. Lillian, Diane, and Paul. And again, I think everybody there knows, is it a perfect solution? No, there's no such thing. But it's a great improvement. And it's really a vanguard, and there are other states in the nation are looking at it going, wow, because they have wrestled with this very issue at great length. You know, how do we put this together? And I've read, I don't know how many, but, well, we use this factor, and our factor is 0.8, and if you're above 0.8, it's good. Nobody really knows what 0.8 means, but there's a long series of calculations that get to it, and so they know, well, that's good or that's not good. But again, it's not really used for anything, because it's any one little turn can do something bad to it. Okay. Any questions on Sue, at least for now? Okay, let's take 10.
Lunch is next. Okay. Probably one of the work groups that we had last fall that wasn't quite as well known as the other two was the construction cost. And no one really worries about construction cost until you're doing your project application and you don't meet. And you're like, where did they come up with this number from? Well, we had a lot of that last fall. With the TRB projects coming through, we had several of them bump against the max or exceed it. So there were a lot of questions on, is this right? Are we doing it correctly? And we had a fairly quick work group on this one. We made some, what I think are probably minor changes, but they are sweeping, and they do affect things. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. As you can see here, we tried to increase the number and accuracy of the projects, and we did that in two ways. One, we extended the scope. Before, we were only collecting 5 years worth of construction projects from the applications. Now we're going to do 7. That's 2 more years. We kind of did the math, and it made sense, and it kept it still relevant without making it too cumbersome. Also, the accuracy part, when you turn in your annual tracking reports, we're collecting on those projects that are completed what your final costs are. And we're going to start phasing in those actual construction costs versus the estimated construction costs. So when you put in your application, you give us your estimation, and I know you all do your best, but those tend to change a little bit. That is affecting that average construction cost score. So we're going to go ahead and start putting in the actual construction costs. When you report those to us, it's important to keep that in mind. Calculating for regional differences. When we've run this math in the past, we've always inflated it up to present day, but we've never adjusted for, say, like a project in El Paso. We've treated that exactly the same dollar for a project in Houston. So we're going to pull over a little bit of the methodology from the replacement cost. We're going to use those location adjustment coefficients we get from RS means, and we're just going to apply those to the construction application project costs to bring everybody to the same location as well as the same time. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Another thing that we're going to do is we're going to publish, just like we've published in the past, we're going to every fall put a report onto the website, but we're not using the max anymore. Now we're going to use the average plus 1 standard deviation. We found that to be a little bit more flexible and reasonable and a little bit more precise, because we have a few projects out there that are just really expensive, and when we allow the entire population to compare to that, it's a little inflationary sometimes. So we found this to be a little bit more reasonable. Now, along with that, because of the inflation we experienced in the, I guess, last year or so, we're going to inflate what we publish to the midpoint of your construction. So for anybody that's put in an application, we request your beginning and your end construction dates. And we're going to calculate the midpoint of that, and then we're going to use, I know this is getting kind of sticky, we're going to use the T-bill yield, and we're going to put that on there to inflate it up to that midpoint of construction. So you're no longer just going to be able to open up the web page, pull off that per square foot number, slap it on your BOR, and say, we meet. Sorry about that. We've got an Excel spreadsheet that we've almost got put together to send out to you. It's what we're going to use when we evaluate your construction application. You'll be able to use that to pull the same numbers in and adjust that per square foot number. Any questions? That's it's the T-bill T-note yield. And the calculator that I give you is going to give you a link to the website where we're getting those numbers. Yes, correct. And so my spreadsheet will let you take the number they publish on their website, put it in the Excel spreadsheet. It'll take it from the point where we inflated it up and reported, and it'll take the rest of the distance to your midpoint. Yes. Yes. And I know this is a little bit more complicated, but believe it or not, this is what was requested. People wanted to be able to inflate forward and project what the inflation would be. Well, unfortunately, ENR doesn't forecast. We can't get a forecast out of them. And a lot of them are actually using this particular yield to estimate the inflation. Yeah, just about anybody you use, they're going to take your bid and they're going to figure out what their cash flows are and they're going to adjust them. They're not just giving you an estimate like it's all being paid to them today. We didn't find a better source. We looked for a couple months and didn't really find one that was readily accessible to everybody, that you wouldn't have to pay for the data, and one that most folks use. Any other questions on that one? I think we had one in the back, but I'm not sure if it got answered or not. The project categories, do you mean like the facility type? The building type? Those aren't changing. Those will appear just like they did before, with the exception of in the past, historically, we have published a per parking space and per dorm bed rate that we haven't really seen used very much, and it's not very useful overall to the project, so we've taken that off the rate chart. Hold on and get the microphone. I can barely hear you. I'm sorry.
We have a fitness and recreation center that probably wouldn't meet the cost standard today. But all the numbers we've seen on the website relate to athletic facilities and student unions, and we have this hybrid animal out there that I didn't see any cost for.
Yeah, that would definitely be something that you would just call Jennifer up and try to size up on the chart correctly versus trying to fly an answer out of me, because I'm not really sure. Sounds like an other, but I'm not confident. So many questions. He was first. Go ahead.
Talk about the midpoint of the schedule. Is that the project schedule or the construction schedule when you start construction?
On the application, we ask you for a start and finish date, and it will be the midpoint of that start and finish date that you give us.
Start of the project or start of construction? Private start of the project.
I think that that's the right.
No, it's the construction stuff.
It's supposed to be start construction, yeah. Yeah. And you were next.
I guess kind of goes to R&R projects, which kind of don't fit in a square foot model very well, as you might appreciate, because I could be doing air handler only, or I could be doing total building, and the square foot number doesn't mean much.
I think it's a really good question. You have to keep one thing in mind when you're using this. It's a meet or does not meet. It's not a your project is approved or is not approved. This has to do with whether you're coming to the coordinating board to present your project. And that's really what they're using it for. They're using it for that litmus test if they feel like they need to look at it or they feel like you're good to go and you can go ahead and build it without having to come and present.
So we have a central plant project that's coming up. So how are we going to meet or not meet the standard?
I don't know. How well is it designed? No. That wasn't funny.
It's the building is actually the cheap part. It's all the equipment that's in the building that's going to be the cost. I mean, it's a between $42 and $45 million.
So I think your question is smarter than me because I'm not seeing you. So you have a cost per square foot, and you apply it to the
if you
building.
apply the cost per square foot, it's going to be like $5,000 a square foot.
It's pretty ugly. Yeah.
So it's not. It's going to be a meaningless assessment unless you're going to take out the equipment cost and just look at the building cost.
Yeah, equipment costs are not part of this. When you fill out the application, you have a construction cost item, and that's what we're dividing the square foot by. So all that equipment in there would be under fixed equipment, I think. And yeah, quite a bit.
There's the building cost category. In the cost section, there's building cost or repair and renovation cost, but that doesn't mean the total project cost. You have your breakout of other things like your architectural service fees, your fixed equipment, like he was saying, would be broken out underneath it. So it wouldn't affect the building cost per square foot. Is that?
Well, the building itself is 10,000 square feet. The equipment is 30 million.
Okay, and that's fine. And when we get the project application, what we usually do is if there's anything that looks like it's higher than it should be, or that would be something we would star at the bottom and say fixed equipment costs include X, Y, and Z. And that's just we just explain that in the briefing sheet so the board sees that and knows. That shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
One of the, just to answer a question back there, several institutions over the last several years built recreation facilities. I know that's not tracked as part of the building types. That data, though, is available here at the system, at the coordinating board, so.
Right. We may be able to do something where we do a search for anything that has, recreation center in it and kind of categorize it that way to kind of see how it falls in that range. And now, like he's saying, we're taking 7 years instead of just the 5, so that kind of broadens our search criteria.
Hey, one quick point, if I could. The idea behind this is, we have this and we have all these things, and I think it's real important to remember that, while they can be very nominal, it's yes, no, and it's a broad brush. In terms of these project requests, Jennifer does an absolutely great job of contacting the institution and asking these questions like they're having here. Okay, I'm looking at this being up $6,000 a square foot. Well, there's more to it. And then going into the actual project application and making sure that or briefing sheet really paints a clear picture in a very succinct way to indicate what your project is. Okay, and so there's a lot of dialogue that goes on in there. And one of the points, and what I really want to get to, is that when Jennifer or Paul or me or whoever calls to say, I'm looking at this project and we're seeing something different. It's not to say you're wrong. It's not a criticism. It's just we're seeing something, and it's opening up a discussion or a dialogue to say, okay, is this right? Because, Lord knows we make errors, and institutions make errors. And we want to make sure that we get that clear picture one time, because if we don't get it right in the start, then we set a whole sequence of events in play. So I know Jennifer, Paul, and the whole staff will work with you in any way, especially when we start looking and we start seeing these huge anomalies, the $6,000 a square foot. Wow, that's a nice building, man. Must be your office, right, Dylan? Okay, and seeing those things, and we'll call, make contact, and work through those issues with you.
Yes, sir.
You're talking about using 7 years of projects as your benchmark. Are you inflating the costs of all of those up? Because
Yes,
you're not using 7-year-old numbers, I hope.
No.
Okay.
No, and that has historically been done. The 5-year projects have been brought up for the 5 years to the report time.
I assumed as much, but.
Good questions. Anybody else? Yes.
Did you guys look at the categories? Because if I remember correctly, one of the things that doesn't exist is a clear definition, like what falls in classroom general and classroom. They're not very well defined, so when you're picking the category, it would be nice to have a definition so that it's not subjective. So did we look into that?
We did actually. We've had several conversations. Jennifer and I have. Some of the other directors who aren't here anymore, and we're still a little bit new. You guys have an advantage on us. We haven't been doing this for multiple years yet. We're trying to develop some really clear definitions for those, and we haven't accomplished it yet. But if you have suggestions, we're more than willing to listen. So send them on. Anything else? Okay. There's one other piece of this that we wanted to put in front of you. We heard that replacement cost was a little bit difficult to understand, and we had an opportunity to drill into it a little bit last fall. We've managed to create an Excel spreadsheet that will basically allow you to reproduce the calculations that our what mainframe used to do and our server does now. So we sent that spreadsheet out with the ENG replacement value and deferred maintenance ratio report this fall, but I'm betting a lot of people didn't really get a chance to look at it or might not even noticed it at all. We realize that the replacement value is kind of difficult. We're going to have a work group. It's coming up in the short term to try and figure out if that replacement value calculation is accurate. The first step to getting any value out of that is to make sure that folks go out and look at that Excel spreadsheet and understand what's being calculated now. More than happy to entertain any questions you might have. Not really driving. I did not send this out to this group, but I sent it out to the group. I can, yes. We can take your names and forward it out to everyone. we'll do that.
So with this replacement value, if it's only calculating EMG in the building, what about the rest of the building?
The rest of the building isn't, when they devised the E&G replacement value, they didn't take into account any of the other types of space. It was strictly just a measure to determine how much it would cost to replace the E&G spaces in that building. It does have a component in it that, say for example, you're supposed to have a 60% efficiency. The component in there takes the efficiency of the building the room's in and ups the space to make it look like it was in a building by itself. So let's say, for example, you had 100 square feet, then it gave you 100 plus the inverse of 60% square feet. Does that make no sense? Yeah, go ahead, Tommy. There's an exception with the health-related institutions, which probably is not worth getting into. But yes, there's a little bit different calculation for them, using the net assignable instead of the E&G. Yeah. And I think there's some other little quirk to it too, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Okay? I didn't take that much time. I'm sorry. All right, I'll give back to Tom then.
But don't worry, Paul will be here for questions and complaints later. Yeah, one of the things with the replacement cost I wanted to talk real quick is when you look at the calculation, it's difficult to understand, if not in some cases impossible to understand, where terms like ASF and NASF are used interchangeably, but they're calculated differently or not at all. And as you run through this, so that's one of the things we're looking at is defining that assignable square feet, because one of the things we saw out of these models is that institutions that report all of their space, which they very well can, and in some ways I can see value in doing all your space, both E&G and non-E&G, will actually decrease their replacement value substantially when it should have no impact at all. And I mean, it really kicks. So we're going to look at that, and that's one of the things we're going to look for. Plus, again, going back to the kind of the overall, whether you want to call it value or culture, whatever you want to call it, is that whatever we're doing, we want to make sure that without a horrible amount of transaction costs to your institution, you can replicate at your institutions exactly what it is we're doing. So you can look and go, okay, I see it. Now, that's not to say anybody's necessarily going to like it, but they can look and at least understand it and be able to come forward and say, I don't like it, and here's why. Because it's really hard to address an issue when someone says, this is wrong, but I have no idea what's wrong with it. Okay, then. Next subject. I mean, it's just difficult on our part, because we count on your help for that. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is some of the upcoming things we've got on the scale that we want to hit on. First of all, some of the legislation that either has been signed by the governor or is going to or is proposed is in front of the governor. And everybody heard, of course, the governor broke his collarbone. We all hope he gets well soon. I don't think that's going to interfere with his other stuff. However, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. It's not my collarbone, so I can't say one way or the other. One of the things actually came from the institutions coming forward. University of Texas, Texas Tech. I think Houston was in on it at some point. I say in on it. It's actually a good thing. It happened, a bad thing. Like they were in on it. But A&M and a couple others came forward and said, look, the $1 million, $2 million requirement for project approval is too low. $1 million for new construction, $2 million for renovation. That's too low. It hasn't been updated, and we agreed. And they proposed a number. They said we think it ought to be $3 million and $6 million. $3 million for new construction, $6 million for renovations. We looked at the different numbers and actually found a decrease in the amount of transaction and a probably better appropriate amount of oversight at $4 million and $4 million. So we assisted all the parties to get that legislation forwarded. It is passed and been signed by the governor. Therefore, your projects for renovation or new construction do not require our approval if they are under $4 million. Change 1 September. 1 September. Okay, now we have an emergency rule being provided and prepared. I've already done it. It has to go before our committee that meets later this month. That states, of course, to change those numbers, but one additional clause that if you have a project that needed our approval, say at 1.5 million new construction, and those costs went up to $3 million, we don't need a reapproval until it meets the $4 million, the new threshold. So the 10%, so those projects, yeah, they're considered approved until they meet the new threshold. Of course, that has not been approved. That has to go forward as a proposed rule change, but that is what we've approved. There may be some holes in that, I don't know, but that's where we're going forward. One of the other things in the legislation states that the coordinating board, by rule, can change those threshold amounts over time. So as they no longer, inflation, don't look for those to change every year. But over time, as it becomes appropriate by rule, we can make that change. Now, the legislation did not do anything to the bond review board's thresholds. So you still have that line of reporting for the bondable projects. We did provide that we thought there ought to be alignment between the two. As of now, I'm not aware of that alignment occurring. So, but I think it will be forthcoming. I think it's just been a very hectic legislative season so far, and a lot of these secondary effects are still catching up. Okay. Okay, and I'll hit on these real quick. The space model. It has been here a long time, almost as long as Harry's been around. It's been around a long time. It's in need of review, and we're going to do that. It's going to be a very protracted process. It's a fairly complicated model, has a lot of moving pieces to it, and what we want to do is go in and look at the entire model, which will mean we will be making a call to institutions to serve on advisory committees and working groups, and there will be sub-working groups and working groups within the working groups on different issues. This is definitely going to be one of those issues that we're going to need your support, like on the PRT and like on the SUE score and like on the inventory changes, for the institutions to get in there and roll up their sleeves, because it's a lot of work. But at the end, I think it's worth it. I mean, it's a great model. But like anything else, it needs to be brought up to today's times. For instance, it takes into effect no consideration of the virtual education. What impact has it had? Has it had a less of an impact on space? Well, you can ask a group of people and they will say yes. It does require more space. Well, you ask another group of people and they say yes. Well, I think the answer is correct in both cases, because there's a lot of flavors of virtual education. From one end of the spectrum, which is strictly, web-based, IMI, interactive multimedia instruction. You throw it out there on a server, people get their login, they go in, they sit at their home, whatever. To the blended learning, to where part of it's online, part of it's in a classroom. And then many flavors in between. So we're talking to folks in the academic affairs arena and trying to figure out some good categories for the different types of that, and essentially be able to categorize it. That's going to be a piece of work in itself. Because there are a lot of impacts. One of the impacts in terms of the space model and the virtual education is, okay, we have this computer-based class, and everybody can sit in the comfort of their home and take this course. However, does everybody have access to high-speed internet? Can everybody afford it? Does everybody have a computer? Can they afford it? Would we be taking a segment of the population saying, you know what, you're just not going to be able to take these courses? Well, we don't want to do that, and I don't think institutions want to do it. So is there some impact? We want to get all that information for those different things. So when we go forward with this model, it's a well-informed model. And that's just one of the things. Research space, is it appropriate for today's? Is it appropriate to include some type of research in the expenditures? Right now we treat a research expenditure dollar, one is like any other, but other different demands. So we need to look at those. Okay, and we talked about the replacement costs. The SUE, again, the program 3-year review. like anything else. It goes out. There's a response in the institutions. One of the things that this pops in is superficially. Well, if I just reduce all the capacities on my classroom, I never have to leave my office, and I can up that score. Well, yeah, but that's kind of, and I don't think anybody would do that. We looked at the numbers. It's about 31 square feet per seat right now. Now, if you look at different standards, and that's average across the state, you'll see some say 20, some say 40 square feet per station. I saw one place at 100. Wow, you must have really big students. But again, when you put a computer on a desk, what about how do you take notes? So does that expand? Do you need more space? Again, these are all things that we want to consider, informing ourselves with studies across the nation that have been done by a lot of different consultants, APPA, SCUP, and several others. Okay, but again, and we really want to look for opportunities for simplification. Because over time we have the data as results. Are there some grouping in there that, we measure all these things and they really pretty much always come out the same? Is there some covariance? Are we measuring the same thing twice? We don't know, but we want to take a look at that and make sure it's good. And then, of course, the SUIT program. Now, one of the others, when we get into the reporting season, timely reports, as I said on several occasions, is very important. Paramount, really, for them to be timely and accurate. What I've talked to Doug Parker about doing, and we're 99% sure we're going to do this, is weekly we'll send out a report to the CEOs and CFOs and reporting officials that essentially is a calendar. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. And a bar, they'll say, this is today's date. On this side of it will be the upcoming reports that are due. On this side are the upcoming reports that were due. And this will be the list of the institutions. And it'll simply say, completed, not completed. Okay? And as all those reports are done on the pass side of the bar, that will drop off. Hopefully what we're going to see is the left hand, the left-hand margin is today's date. And that we can do that. And we're here to help in any way we can. But it's hard for us to help an institution or help, set those conditions for needing a November 1st suspense on November 15th. Our time machine is done broken. We just can't do it. Now, on October 15th, there's things we can do, okay? And we can help with that. But again, that's just to keep that on the forefront. It's easy for things to drop off. You forget and go, oh, darn. Or a report submitted but not certified. Now, I know nobody's ever went, oh, did we send that over to the CFO to sign? Oh, crap, get it over there. No one's ever done that one. Okay. Or the CFO's, yeah, what? The what? Oh, yeah, I've got it right here. Do you need that? Okay. So, again, those are just things to help to prompt the system. That's all they're for. They're not to be tattletale reports. They're there to prompt the system, to prompt the thought. Okay? Okay. Okay, we talked about classroom co-use, one of the emerging issues. One of the other things we're going to be needing to study is, and this bill is actually before it has been signed, but we anticipate having to study how much does it cost to provide ROTC. How many institutions have ROTC programs at their institution? Okay, how much does it cost to the institution, hard cost, to provide that program? And then the amount you will be able to charge for that ROTC course would be that amount to recover your costs. Okay, and that's and we don't know exactly what that'll look like in the end, but we'll be looking at that's one of the bills if indeed the governor does sign it. So that's one of the pieces of legislation that will be going forward and looking at that. There's also will be a study going on of efficiencies and kind of looking at best practices. That originally that was a very huge undertaking. It's somewhat throttled back, but essentially look for best practices, and we'll have those studies going on. And that's not a big deal. The next one, a project closeout report. I talked about that. Now, folks are probably wondering about stimulus funds and capital projects and all that kind of stuff. Right now, the word is there is no money, no stimulus funds set aside for the capital projects. We've called institutions, said, hey, submit this like right now. And I didn't even have to be there to hear the discontent when I said, and I need it in 4 hours. Trust me, that wasn't by choice. That was one of those, we need it by now. Okay, and that happens. I mean, that was one of those things. We got to get it right now. Everybody watches the news. Oh, it's got to happen right now. Got to happen right now. Got to happen right now. And then it stopped. Okay, and then it got discussed. So it has been the decision that was not the case. Okay, now probably the most important part of this is we want to hear from you all. What do you think are the things from your individual cases that we need to look at? That's really, I mean, that's the most important thing. These are things that we've looked at and we've heard and seen other issues. We want to hear from you. What are those things that you think, from your institutional perspective, that we need to take under study? Yeah, I know that usually people are like, yeah, and this, and oh yeah, this. But, you know, again, yes, please.
I don't know if you want something literal, but space model has some flaws that are really obvious. One is that if you're an institution that does research, you already have to document research in the federal way. And what the federal standard acknowledges is that research happens in all kinds of spaces, not just research labs, whereas our space model doesn't. And so, you know, when we count up, 250 spaces, that's all we get here. When we know that we've got research in offices, you know, a lot of research that is dry research or it's computer-based research, and it's done in an office, we don't get to count any of that. So the model diminishes the real amount of space that actually research is happening in. But from our federal audit, we get to tell them where research really is. So that's something that we need to concentrate on, is fixing that.
And I agree with you. The right now in college space, and I think there might need to be a little clarification. Now, there's two parts of that research space portion of the model. There's what you actually have.
Right.
Now, that right now what we're counting to actually have is just 250s, 255s. Right. Now, that number in itself, that research space portion of the model, as of today, isn't really used for anything. It all rolls up into the aggregate. So you're not really being diminished. The model doesn't diminish because you're going to model a certain number of square feet. Where those square feet come from is one of two ways, either based on your number of FTSE or your research expenditures, a 3-year rolling average adjusted per million. That may not be the best way. Now, should we include other types of space in that category? Now, that's a question. So I don't think the model doesn't diminish your square feet based on those types of rooms. Now, does it based on the way that amount of modeled space? Perhaps. That's what we want to look at. Should we count for that model? Would it make that model more useful if we set, like the library space, 310 with usage code 20 series is counted in that research space portion model? That would probably be appropriate. Or any room type with that 20 series, and I don't even have the terms right, but what the term formerly known as room type of a room use or functional code, space use code. I've got the prompter over here. You know, the thing, if movie crews ran the world, that's what I got. I got like cards, and I need them. But that those would then transfer it over and count it as that kind of space. But I think it's important to also note that the model as it is today, nothing goes on inside that research space category per se that affects anything. It's all on the aggregate in terms of the other. Now, then it begs the question, then why have it? Well, perhaps if we got it better, then it would have some utility for other things, and that's what we're counting on your feedback. I think you make an excellent point.
And one other one is instructional space. It's skewed more. You get more square footage for first-year undergraduate students. That's not the model of our university. Most of our students are much later. They take longer. So, you know, the curve for many universities is first-year undergraduates, that's your highest number, and it goes down. Ours does a different thing. So we're penalized by the culture that we have a lot more fourth-year students or fifth-year students. They get, you know, in the model, they get significantly smaller amount of instructional space assigned to them
So they're graduate students?
No, they are not. They're
Okay,
still-
so undergraduate's going to count as an undergraduate.
No,
yeah,
they,
the undergraduate.
No, they do not. No, they do not.
How do
First
they-
year gets something like, I don't know, 60. Yeah, I know the model quite
Oh,
well.
oh,
They don't.
okay. No,
But they don't. First year students get a lot more. No, there's actually first and second, and then third and fourth. Third
okay,
and fourth
I
get
think I
lower.
see where the
Yeah.
confusion is. Those functional areas are based on the CIP code. That's the area of study, not the year of the student.
No. Okay, we can talk about it.
Yeah,
later.
sure. I mean, we can open up the model, but you've got in terms of that, you've got area 1, 2, 3, and 4, and area 1 is your more space intensive. Yeah, I think it goes 4 is, and those are the ones your agriculture, visual performing arts, those kind of things. 3 or a little bit less. Your program area is actually the term program area 1. And I always get mixed up, but there's 48. The lower one that gets modeled 45 square feet per full-time student equivalent for undergraduate is English, history, the less space intensive. Now, the more space intensive program areas will require, and that pulls that in from the aggregate numbers. And Jennifer runs this model, and I'm not going to explain. I probably could, but I'd probably mess up 3/4 of it. But either way, the program areas you see actually take the amount of activity in a given program or group of program fields and says these program fields just require more space. You can have so much space in a history class. And it's fairly easy. You know, it's not saying it's not important, it's just the demand. And then if you try to have a agriculture program in that same amount of space, well, the fact is cows take a little more space, and plows and stuff, they just take more space. So they need to in visual performing arts. So we can get together, and after part of this, the next section is going to be a free-form Q&A. If you feel as though there's anything or there's stuff you want to touch on, then we'll be available for it after lunch, and we can hit on that at great detail. We'll stay as long as we need to. But I do think in terms of that, we need to relook at those program fields. And is that 45, 60, 70, or was it 45? Yeah, 40, it goes up 15s to 90, 45, 60, 75, 90. Are those appropriate amounts for undergraduate? Now, the graduate levels on that did drop off significantly within those. The idea behind that is that those students can leverage the undergraduate space also, economy of scale type issue. Now, that could be a very good point that we look at in terms of, does that meet the reality of all the institutions? Do we have predominantly graduate? And then in terms of the 90, I think it breaks down in half, 90, 45, et cetera, perhaps those need to be adjusted within there. Very possible. And those are the questions. So, and I think it's important to remember, in terms of reviewing the space model, that's one portion of the model. And that's a ton of work. So again, we're really counting on the support of the institutions on this. And then, but wait, folks, there's more. That's just academic. Then we have the health-related model we have to do. And then we have the agencies, and we have several models we have to do to fix. So it's going to be a protracted process. But what we want to get it is as right as possible. We don't want to take so long that all the decisions we make are based on antiquated data already, or that it never happens. Interestingly, and it's right up there, it's been started previously but never to completion. I've read, I mean, we have volumes on space model review. Met and working group came up with following recommendations. Need to look at this, need to look at that, need to look at that. Essentially what I'm saying now. Well, the 3-5 folks are like, sure. And then they get swamped. So, and they don't have all that expertise. And they don't claim to. The expertise is sitting out there. And that's what we're counting on to get. Okay. But again, the next portion of this will be freeform. Some of the issues that were brought up by yesterday's group, the replacement cost, we hit that, standardizing that. The SU score, we touched on that in the virtual and using the OOC. One of the things that was brought up, when you have a building that has a large open footprint, and you're using it for instructional space, that becomes a problem because you can have several programs there at the same time. Okay? And you can, many times, your drafting labs or things like that are huge. Take, for instance, this room. You know, you could have several different sections of a drafting course or an art course working in this same space. However, with utilization, in this room, given one room number, one distinct number, you would only get credit for that one activity. Well, how do you fix that? Well, one of the things the NCES manual brought up, and we adopted it in our change, was the use of phantom walls and segmenting out that room. The caveat to that is to make sure that when the time comes and you go through your review, that you can logically show. Okay? Let's say, for instance, this was a cube farm. And we say, okay, this area of cubicles is office X, and then we got, you know, corridor, we call it C1 over here, and we got office B and all that. Well, the problem with that is cubicles are furniture. They move. And if you reassign cubicles, you got to go through and redo your floor plans, not just your inventory. So when you're doing that, be very cautious that there's some clear defined areas, that it can be clearly defined. For instance, we have these two columns. From here, oh, that's clearly definable area. Where people have run into problems with it is when they say, oh, about 8 feet out from this wall and out about 10 in this area. That's closet. You know, or, you know, we're counting that as mothballed or something like that. I'm feeling, but again, you can run into a lot of trouble with it. So I would say use it sparingly, use it when it's needed, and there are a lot of cases when it is, when you actually do need to use those phantom walls and categorize it. And remember, you must uniquely identify all those areas. You can't say, oh, that's, what room is this? Oh, that's room 102. And if you're on a team looking and say, well, I'm showing this is 5 rooms. Oh, yeah, but we just call it 102. Well, something in there is wrong. Either you didn't uniquely identify it, or the room data are incorrect. Okay? And to make sure that you keep track of all your data, you might have 5,000 square feet, and you go through and you add, okay, it's room 101, but you add 102, 103, 104, and you don't change the data in 101. So you got 5,000 square feet, another 2,000 square feet, and 3,000, and you just doubled the amount of your square footage. Very easily can happen, because you remember, you're dealing in a sea of data. So you have to have your checks mounted at your institution to do that. So while it's a great tool, it's like any other tool. You know, you don't clean your windshield with a sledgehammer. Although sledgehammers have a use, but it's not to clean windshields. Just make sure you're using the right tool for the right job. Okay. And another one was in terms of accordion walls and classrooms. You have expandable classroom. Has 2 rooms, but sometimes it's used as a full classroom. Other times it's used as 2 different classrooms. How do you handle that? And it becomes difficult because you have 2 different rooms. Now, if you're looking at it from a SUE utilization standpoint, well, you just have, you know, class, I don't know, English whatever, section 1, English whatever, section 2. One meets in that room, one meets in this room. Students show up and they go, room to room. And they sit down. And they go, okay? And then the next class, you pull the accordion wall back and you got a different history, section 1 on that side of the wall, and then, you know, chemistry or whatever over here. Now, that can get a little confusing at times. Or at other times, you just say, you know what, utilization, we're going to take a hit on the utilization side of it, but we'll catch it on demand. It will affect your percent fill, but not danger. If you just put it in one, okay, if you put it in only half of that, say, you know, this section of 50 is going to be in this room for 20, and you're going to move the wall, well, you're going to show a 200% fill, but you're going to show 0 for the other. Mathematically, it smooths out in the end. Okay, so, you know, the best thing in any of this, report the data as accurately as possibly can, and let it play out. You know, and again, none of the systems are designed to punish anybody or any of those things. They're simply designed to get good clarity on the data. Okay. What other issues do we need to look at? Sir.
Along that SUE idea, I guess, is like there's 2 ways. You mentioned the fact that there's legislation pending out there that may allow, like, a community college and a university to come together and utilize the building effectively. Okay. I guess I just want to make sure we both get a good score, because we've been proactively coordinating those kinds of activities.
Excellent, and thank you for bringing that up. In terms of that, right now our report doesn't allow you to put a class from another institution and to show that another institution is using this room. I talked to Doug, in fact, I was on vacation last week, 2 weeks ago, and looking at perhaps modifying the 5 and adding a FICE field. It's just saying you can report a building number at this, if you put a FICE in here, if there's a number there, that means that building number and room number belongs to that FICE. And then it would roll up to show that we're actually, that we're showing that it's on our inventory, but the actual user is that FICE code. And then that can easily be reconciled to their FICE, well, if they turn one in, or their 4 or 5, to show that their 5 reflects that that class is being held there, in terms of the SUE stuff. Now, in terms of the course and the course information, the 4, absolutely correct. I agree. So, and that's a fairly easy, seems easy sitting here, just add that field. But anybody who's dealt with that, that IT, not that they're difficult, it's just difficult to add fields to things and to not break something in the process.
I've always wondered about instructional hours in sports fields, what to do with that. Because,
outdoors?
Yeah, we lose those. We have instructional hours in sports fields or tennis courts that are outdoor tennis courts. It's real instruction, but the numbers.
Well, and I would reflect this, and I agree. You have football class on, well, believe it or not, the football field. Wow, shocking. Or swimming class in the pool. I'm stunned. Remember, these data are used to determine need for capital development in terms of building development. That's the whole driving behind it. So if you're holding it on a field, you don't need a building because you got a field. So there's one side of that that says, okay, it probably shouldn't because it's not putting a demand on a building. There's another side that says they take tests, they hand out syllabi. So where do they do that? Do they do it on the sidelines of the field? Perhaps. Or is there a room that they use? And then there's the other side, if you use that room. See, no one and this is one of the things I said, go back to those days. No one's going to tell a given faculty member where the best place to hold their class is. It'd be very presumptuous to do that. I would never do that. I mean, they're the experts. So if Dr. Wanjagi says, well, yeah, great, that's my classroom, but this is botany, and we're going outside. We're going to look at trees. Well, I'm not going to say, no, you can't. You must sit in this room. But then on the other side of it, the scheduling side, well, if she's not going to use it, I'm going to backfill it, behind her. Well, then I've created a stacked class if I do that. Well, that's one of the things, adding the measure, the demand measure, then, okay, you stack the class, you're going to lose one of them, but you still get credit for the course, the existence in your demand measure, and the need for facilities. Because I think the argument is best that every offering needs some type of space in a building. I mean, I don't care what it is. There are very few that don't, of some sort. Because in that model, there are all kinds of different spaces, not just the classroom that are considered. So, and it's a difficult one. So there's a couple sides of that argument. Well, it's outside. I mean, are you going to build like an indoor football stadium? That would be nice. That'd be nice. And there's a few institutions that have those. Normally, donors do really well in building those things. Okay. Any other, ma'am?
The email communication that we get from the CB, lots of us have different roles at the university. Some maybe have on the facilities inventory side, some of us on the project application, some of us in all of them. Is there anything that we can do to where you can know something is out there and I can go check, to where you may have an interest in something but it's not in your direct responsibility? So some of the communication, for example, about the stimulus funding, and I know it went to every institution, but at ours maybe it didn't happen anywhere else. Sometimes that information doesn't flow downwards.
Very, very good point. And in
Right.
terms of the stimulus, there just wasn't a whole lot of it. And most of what we were doing was trying to make sure we were on the front end because we knew when it happened, it was going to happen quick. And
I was just wondering if there's a way to keep up with all these different work groups and what's happening. We may not be in all of
well,
them.
and I
but
think
we have an
that's
interest
valid.
in-
Whether we have like a current events, so put something like that on there, and sure. I mean, we'll put that down. Paul, you can have that done by 2. No, I think that's a very good point, because like any other, I mean, you know, you sit down, okay, I'm going to do this today, and you get some of that done, and then, woof, it hits. But no, very good. Thank you, Elaine. Okay, any others, please? I mean, you know, even if it...
A couple kind of related to the
Certainly.
stimulus things, and there's ironically one that just came through the Department of Energy on some PV cells that we were kind of interested in trying to do, except that universities aren't included in the federal action, and we couldn't get SECO to sponsor us. Instead, they want us to go back to SECO to get it. And the same thing kind of comes up with roads. I'm just picking some things that still concern me as a university.
Sure.
Even though that's not ENG space, I've got to still get people there. And I recognize there's probably a really great lost opportunity to get some of my roads remilled, which badly need it. And obviously, we don't use TRB money. I mean, you go down the list of the money sources you can't use for some activity like that. But unfortunately, it seems like in Texas, our universities are kind of constantly exempted somehow. TxDOT, in a nice way, sorry, TxDOT, not taking care of us. I mean, and we're that funky state agency in between people, you know. The cities won't support us, most of them, because we're state property. Not against them, you know, they have their own list. So we couldn't even get applications filed because of that. So I don't know, I speak to this group because, you know, we're all higher ed, and we're not being represented somehow out there trying to chase down some of this money.
Yeah,
we all probably could have used some of it.
And you know, that the entire decision for the stimulus funds, I mean, that, you know, we sent out a call requesting nominations for project to the capital side. We developed some methodologies that if we had money, how would we, for tuition abatement. We actually, then when GA we briefed them on, you know, here's our methods, procedures, and this is what we're looking at in terms of accountability. And the decision was made by between governor and legislature, the funds would be allocated in a certain manner. Again, you know, that's the political system. You know, we are in an agency of it, and those decisions are made. Unfortunately, you know, it's somebody in the end of that isn't going to get something, and somebody is. So, you know, there's winners and losers, back to that zero sum. We try to create positive sum games whenever we can, but that's anytime you're dealing with money, there's a finite amount of it, and you can only get so much of it.
Saying is that the stimulus money that did come through, none of it went to higher ed.
It is going to higher ed just for the there's some going to higher ed, but just for the capital projects side of it, all that list of projects that we requested, none of those projects were received funding. There are funds that are going to higher education in the appropriations bill. Yes, and they're earmarked for exactly what they're for. It's online. It's SB1. It hasn't been signed yet. Okay.
4586.
Yeah, I mean, there are several. The ones specific for higher education are all listed in Senate Bill 1. It's out there. Go to LBB, and you can download it between Title 3 and Title 12. It's all listed in there. Or Article 3 and Article 12. It's all listed in there. But again, for those that capital development, major modernization, renovation, and renewal, none of the funds were made available for that. Any other questions or things we need to look at? I mean, we're pushing on the lunch hour. So, okay, super. It's 12. We're going to be here at 1 o'clock. It'll be open forum. I know across the state we have folks that are at different levels in dealing with the inventory. Some people have done, or this area, capital side. Some people have done it for 20 years, and they're looking at me going, heck, see, no. And you're probably right. And then there are other people that are fairly new to it and have some questions. And procedural. We will be here at 1 o'clock. In fact, traffic and such like that, we'll make it 1:15, and we'll be here to answer whatever questions or address whatever concerns that you have. Okay? Thank you so much, folks. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Testing.
Hey, all right, good. Thanks, Jennifer. And for those of you who came back, and I want to get started, I got a question I want to pose and get your feedback, and I posed the same question to the group yesterday. 20 years ago, if you put computers in a room, they would be, or maybe even longer ago, they would be considered special equipment, right? They would be. Well, times change, and so the question, and we want to put together a policy statement informed by what you tell us so we can put some guidance out to the field to help, especially as we go forward. And I guess the bare bones question is, does the presence of the computer itself qualify as special equipment?
I think you can have a classroom that is equipped for English that we saw.
Yeah, we've seen that.
That was used strictly for English. That had a computer on it. Times and checks. So we need a 112 for classroom special equipment.
Okay, and so, I think what Harry is saying is that, no, they're not special. I mean, in today's environment, there's really, it's like a chair, I suppose, or a table. It's just part of the equipment. It's not the same, but it can be treated about in the same way. Now, on the other hand, are there rooms where those computers are indeed special equipment specific to a discipline? Well, the answer to that is...
More about the software that's on and the type of, like for NASA, they've got a NASA project.
Sure, or it could be, perhaps CAD for CAD. Yeah, those kinds of things. So that therein right there defines the issue, is that the answer is both yes and no, and neither, and both.
Well, and what level of access are given? I mean, if you've got a classroom, if we had this room and there were computers on this room, and we told everybody at the university, or everybody in the building, they could use this space, and they could come use these PCs, then that might make it allowed. But if it's limited access, locked off, and the only time you use it is class, and maybe it's classroom.
Or class
how you're using it would define it.
Okay, so I guess then that goes to the next question. This follows, almost parallels exactly the discussion last time. What is indeed the defining characteristic when you're looking at that room and making the determination whether it is and assuming there's appropriate enough activity for it to tip that scale in terms of instructional activity, a classroom or a class lab? What would be that characteristic? And really, that's a question for discussion. There isn't an answer I've got in my pocket and go, wrong, or right. I don't have that. There's no cards. It's a question because what we owe you guys is a policy statement to say, here are the criteria, like in the special cases that's in the manual now. If you have a room, blank, 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 it should be this, or blank, 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 it should be that.
My thought is that the lab would constitute on a muscle burner that goes into the lab. Other than that, it's classroom.
Okay, so that's another, and that's something that came up yesterday, is that if the sections that are scheduled in there are predominantly lecture, then what? Classroom?
CD and full method of
Right, and we can track those things.
So it's lecture or lab, it's only.
And
That's why we looked at those.
Exactly, and that's verifiable based on that. And then it becomes, okay, can you hold lectures in laboratories? Sure. So does that now define those other rooms? And again, I'm not playing stump the chump in that. I'm just trying to walk this down as many of the pathways as we can, so when we come up with this statement, it can be applicable. Paul.
But if it's set up as a computer lab, then that is no longer not everything can be taught.
Well, that's the way these were, because it was English and math being taught to these two different ways. They did not share. They were only for other math or special classes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a 110 and a half. Well, exactly, and conversely, because it's a laboratory, doesn't mean that you can just do lab activities in there. Or if a room that looks like it's no equipment, doesn't mean you can't hold a lab section here, depending on the discipline. It may be the appropriate place to have the lab where there's very little additional equipment. Okay, that's when you look at the SUE score, it's substantial. What we've seen in the terms of the data is the number of classrooms as a relative proportion dropping, and the number of labs going up substantially. If you look at the utilization rates as a percentage of the above 25, you've got many institutions that go way over 25 hours per week of use of a class laboratory. Very few reach the 38. If you look, so what you're seeing is relatively more activities are gravitating into those areas we're calling labs, and less activities are gravitating into the classrooms. So is that because there's more lab sections being offered? I think that's still a relative proportion is about the same. The question then becomes, is there something with the way we're classifying? And I think in terms of the computers, that can be misleading, because the way that the nominal definition is, and certainly this isn't a quote, but it's paraphrased, that if there's special equipment specific to a discipline, it's a class lab. So, and then it becomes now computer. I mean, we're sitting here, the person's got a computer right there. If I was sitting there, my laptop would be out in front of me now. They're just not as special as they used to be. I have a cell phone. It's a computer there. It's just not what they used to be. So, but we don't want to say, okay, they're just simply they don't really count, doesn't matter, because there are other instances where they indeed are the special equipment for that particular discipline. The question then becomes, is we're trying to develop a definition that will stand scrutiny if an institution undergoes PRT or an audit. That say, okay, here was the guidance, here's my logical inference of that room type. And that's the question that we have, and we're soliciting all of your input on that.
Does that change the lab classroom? That has no impact on
Not formula funding. No, it does not. It does in your SUE and that sort of thing, and perhaps tangentially, as people look and see, for the appropriateness of allocating a certain resource a given direction, they may look at that as evidence, go, well, they're not using this very much. Now, there's no hard, fast formula that those numbers plug into, but certainly they can be used. And it really makes a difference, because the SUE score, getting it as right as we can out of the gate, helps to make it both usable for us and usable for the institutions.
One thing, the way the technology is moving forward so rapidly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They were taught a lot of times. No paper hardly passed out whatsoever. They took their laptop.
Sure.
So you have a lecture hall, you may not have built in.
Right, exactly. Sure. Right.
Data back and forth. You really start to split hairs.
Well, and again, that's where we're trying to come up with one statement that can be, both defensible in the case of a review, say, yes, these data are correct. And that's mutually used, because as we do analyses and comparative analyses, and we start looking at things, we want to make sure that, institution A is calling an apple, and institution B is calling an apple based on the same criteria of calling that an apple. So, again, one of the ideas that was posed yesterday was the predominance of use by the type of section. which means if it's predominantly laboratory sections in that room, then it would be a laboratory, even though there would be lectures. So it redefines predominance of use down to the type of academic activity, not so much by discipline, which is usually, or by functional area, but the predominance then being defined by the type of activity. And that would be on the institution's level to defend that. We're not going to go through on a routine basis and run any report that says you had 22 in there. We're not going to do that. Okay? But at a time when it comes time for a review, then that's, or the peer review or whatever. Because the reality is, I mean, in a very extreme case, which I don't anticipate any institution going through it, it could come to the point where an external audit would be mandated. That's heavy expense. So we do owe you the clearest guidance that we possibly can on that. And that's something that's usable. It's not going to take you forever to make that decision. We're not going to do by shoe size, average, or anything like that. But, so right now we've got the idea that the predominance of use by type of activity, whether it's lab, lecture, etc. That's one of the ideas right now. But to make sure we understand that the presence of the computers, or get your opinion, and I think I captured this from what you've said, is that the presence of the computer per se does not define the room. Would that be mutual agreed that okay. So there has to be a different characteristic. So in that definition where it says has special equipment, isn't necessarily, there are exceptions to that rule. Obviously, if you go on, there's fume hoods and there's Bunsen burners and sinks and those kind of things. It would be a lab of some sort. But then again, to make sure, because I can see this question, well, I've got this lab and I teach 7 lecture sections and 5 lab sections in there. Hence, the predominance of use is lecture. Therefore, it is a classroom, and that's the backward side of using that predominance of use. So I think there's a couple questions. Question 1: does the presence of the computer define the characteristics of the room? I think the answer is no, not in 2009. Perhaps in 69, 79, and even perhaps 89, there would be some validity to that. Now, that's different than the other rooms, which are, my experience tells me that those are the rooms that are kind of used by departments. That's their departmental computer lab, and students have this, they stop by, they use it. There may be a section taught in there every now and then on something, or maybe even a class period is scheduled in there, and that's a different story. And we're talking about a room that looks like this with computers on the table.
And two, with classroom, they have 0.
Yeah, and that's the secondary things that.
Whereas they used to, where math. Everybody used, so maybe you should have had all 0. Okay, but it did have a system, whereas labs have a system.
Correct.
They got a certain system.
Right, based on, and that's where the specific equipment specific to a certain discipline.
You let 220s out of.
Yeah, I'm not, because there's no real measure that isolates 220.
What makes it?
Irregularly scheduled. No, but if it is, I apologize, but I think we're thinking alike.
I can't hear that.
Yeah, and certainly we don't want to complicate or even require a complication to evidence why a certain room was categorized a certain way based on your inventory of the computer programs held on it, and use that and hold that to a standard. And I agree with you, and that's one of the things we kind of shied away because, if there isn't enough work already, as I've told folks, I mean, you look at the possible numbers of combination of room inventory information, 327 octillion possible combinations of room information in any given room, starting at zero. That's plenty, and I've equated it to, some people think doing a facilities inventory is like inventorying, say, computers on a campus. That's fairly simple. Computer comes in, you register it, send it out, you get a terminal user, they sign for it, it's pretty easy. But doing a facilities inventory is different because not only do you have to do that, you also have to track all the computers or all the programs that are loaded on that computer. Well, that gets a little sketchier, but with desktop remote support, desktop support, you can still do pretty good tracking and limiting some permissions. But then, to really get it right, you also have to track how much time that terminal user is using each of those programs. And oh, by the way, you have to know what programs are, and everybody has administrator access and they can add whatever program they want. So you have to keep track of that. And so it gets a little sketchy. So we don't want to put the resolution so low to where it would require an institution to go to that level of detail when it's not necessary. So we're trying to find that comfortable medium where we get accuracy and with sufficient resolution, because we don't need to go that level of precision. I mean, precision and accuracy are often thought to be interchangeable. They're completely different things. So what is that level? I think if we make the statement, A, the presence of the computer is not the defining characteristic, and the use by a specific discipline would be a defining characteristic, because that's one of the things in the nominal definition, and then use by that discipline for predominantly laboratory sections. Because there are classrooms, I think every institution has them, where a certain department or a certain college holds that thing tight, and that's an English class, that's our English classroom, and we're going to schedule on, and that's ours. So when you look at the schedule, it's English, or it's mathematics, or it's history, or what have you. So we have those too. So we can't use just that. So I guess based on what I'm hearing here, and what I heard yesterday, I'm leaning towards the statement that the computers do not define it. If a room is used by a specific discipline for predominantly laboratory sections, then it would be considered a laboratory. If it's used by a specific discipline for predominantly lecture, it would be considered a classroom. So the predominance of use would be based on the type of activity going on inside the room. Now, that's all on the institution to provide the background on that. We're not going to dive in and go, okay, yeah, hey, Tommy Alvarado, how's HSC doing? Yeah, okay, well, let me look it up. Okay, that's a blank. Okay, thanks. We're not doing that. That's going to be completely on the institution. So we, again, don't want to set a bar at a level that's going to be an unmanageable amount of data or anything like that. So does that sound reasonable for that classification? Again, we're talking about a relatively small amount of space on the campus. And it's one of the things that we're going to set forward in the PRT stuff, and that's you folks when you go to these institutions, to look and go, that is a possible situation where it's going to be a little muddy. It's not going to be cut and dry. It's a lab. I mean, you can walk into a room and it has computers on it, and you can have identical room next door. It looks exactly the same. And one could be a classroom, and one could be a class laboratory, and they both could be correct. In the manual, and that's a very good question, there's an area in there, special cases, or kind of like an FAQ section. We'll put an addition in there for special circumstances. We're not going to rewrite the whole manual. It'll be... Well, the application of it, I would anticipate institutions that do that would be able to do that by then. would be able to check the blocks on those. Again, it should be if you've linked your room data to your scheduling or looked at it, can look at it side by side. It should be fairly easy. Again, we're trying to give yes, no answers. Does it have this? Yes. Does it have that? No. So it's a very simple decision matrix on what direction to go, as opposed to, well, maybe. Well, and then you just go into a nebulous mess. And then, at some point, there's going to be a decision, yes, no, in there. And that's not fair to anyone. So, yes, ma'am. Yeah. Well, and I think, well, in terms of CIP code, I mean, there's a general I think in terms of that, there's a general department that's something, and you can take that to great levels of resolution. We use the first two characters are what we use in that. Now, there are other reports, but in terms of the space model, and that we use the first two characters in that CIP, and that's what places a given course or a given activity in its program area. Now, there can be other uses when you're looking at your federal indirect cost recovery and those kind of things. It gets far more specific. So it's in an institutional interest to get it to that level of resolution. But again, I'm not going to speak for any particular institution. Now, and as far as review and how far down does it go? And again, the meeting tomorrow, my view would be is if you get the first two characters, because those are based on field. If you have business, well, it might be, I don't know, 35, whatever it is, and that's probably not it. But 35, then you got 35-1001, 35-1002. If you get into 35 series, you're probably pretty close, okay? Because now that's for our routine use. But I think it's in the institution's best interest to get that as defined as possible because we're not the sole consumers of these data, and there are other areas that you're going to use them for, whether you're linking them to research projects and those things, if an institution does that, because again, as was pointed out earlier, research just doesn't go on in a given area, so you want to be able to link what type of research and all those kind of things. But again, as far as reviewing the PRT, I would defer to Deb's tomorrow. For our use, I think if you get it in the field, you're probably pretty close. And then there's that obvious point where it ain't that. But getting into like each semester, if I teach business and I also teach economics, well, I'm teaching 3 economics classes and 2 business, which would be a lot of classes. And then 2, so this is prorated so much in the CIP, I don't think anybody's really that concerned about it. I think the host department would be a sufficient level of resolution. And then, at least for our review, then if you go further, and I think it's probably in the institution's best interest to define that, but for our uses, we don't use it any deeper than that. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. 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 Sure. Mm-hmm. For the audit, now the audit will only go on every 5 years, unless there's a remedial, and you'll get a second. But perhaps a third. But for that case, I think, Devin, again, I'll defer to her how she procedurally, but that there's a file update window that you can go in and do an in-stride or an in-course update to your inventory. I think it's 30 days prior to your audit date, and then the samples pulled and those data are considered valid. No. No. Well, I mean, for your audit, you want to have it as accurate as possible at that time period. That assists the PRT in going through and it assists the institution also in going through. But no, the only data we use for models and everything else are the fall data, the fall captured data. So that's once a year. Now, sometimes institutions feel it's more important to send in serious MES electrons. Now, you do get error messages that you have to reconcile and those kind of things. But that's the data that we use. Okay.
Take that November 1 stuff, write it out, say
Yeah, the inventory gets locked once everybody's certified. The inventory's locked and then it's held. In fact, they have to reopen the inventory if you have changes, which we don't like that much. I mean, I did it when I was at an institution that asked and in fact was told, no, we're not going to reopen it because we found an error, but it wasn't terrible. Yeah, and if it comes online on December 1st, well, I mean, it's covered in reports, not online. We'll be online December 1st. We know that December's after November, and it'll reflect on the next inventory. But the aggregate square footage will be counted in terms of the space model in the approved not online.
But for the purposes of the audit, we certify November 1st. If we learn of and want to make changes past that, say we find out in February or March that a couple of things weren't, whatever, or something does change or alter, we know an audit's coming in June, we can send an updated version that we use so that
That is my understanding.
Right.
That is my understanding. That it's 30 days.
do what they wanted
Right.
because they wanted to be more audit compliant.
Yeah. And some want to send in data as they get them and several, and again, that's an institutional management issue. We're certainly not going to mandate. The only thing we say is we have to have the data in by November 1st so that we can prepare the models for the upcoming year.
So you freeze that file in November.
Once you certify,
We can update beyond that. It won't have any further effect on the model.
Torsh, I'd defer that to you. Once they certify, there's it's for like a month that there's no. Yeah, so through the month of November, December, while we're running these models, there's no updates. And then December or January 1st, the first week of January, it's reopened for you to send in 2009 data.
You still got that other one frozen.
Yeah, that is the official report. In fact, to change that, you actually decertify the report and then recertify the report. Are there any questions or any other concerns that we have? Yes, ma'am.
I have trouble figuring out who to talk to the planning department directly. I can go out and talk to the professor, I count chairs, I use the fire code, trying all that, but I haven't come up with a good way to define what our capacity.
Yeah, and the question is, determining the capacity, because it is true. You can go in and you can count chairs. That's not going to preclude an hour later somebody coming in and taking a couple armed tablet chairs or 10 and moving them to another classroom. And that's absolutely. And again, institutional.
If the furniture's not fixed, you can get more people in with not great big tables in there than you can with just chairs.
Right, and different furniture configurations will yield different capacities. That's why we look and we say, 20 to 40 square feet. If you're in that window per seat, that's probably pretty normal. We've pulled the data from last year, what exists right now. And we've got the numbers on each institution. And on the aggregate, it's about 31 square feet per chair across the state. And the reason we pull that, and I'll be very perfectly candid with you, is that it's a pretty, for institution, I'm not saying anybody would do it, but it's a pretty easy thing to go, well, just shift the capacities. So if all of a sudden we see, an institution's at 25, and then all of a sudden they're at 50 square feet per, that might stimulate us to go, hey, we might want to double check and call and say, are you sure? Because, you just dropped your overall campus capacity in half. So you have half as many, half the ability to teach classes that you did before. And that's the only reason we use it for. Because, it is kind of tempting. We got to be honest. That's a tempting little fix to bump a big number. And so the only thing we're going to look at is to send a red flag. And then by the same token, if you've got an institution right now that's running about 15 or 16, I would bet dimes and donuts right now their data are not accurate. So if that goes up to 35, we're probably not going to have a fit. We might make a phone call. Hey, we noticed that your average popped up to 35. Said, yeah, we never really paid a whole lot of attention, and now we have, and 35 is an accurate number. And we can live with that. Or, on the other hand, you may have some that are sitting about 50 right now, and all of a sudden that drops down to 30. Well, again, probably accurate data. So we're looking at a window in there that's probably a safe window, 20 to 40 square feet per. And on the aggregate, that's probably pretty accurate. You'll have some classrooms that won't be as space efficient, and then you'll have others like lecture halls where your per square feet is going to be much smaller, but on the aggregate.
Well, did anybody else find theirs for their class schedule? We have so many people to be in this class.
I think several institutions. Mm-hmm. I think several institutions are. So you can't. So you by. Yeah, and there are probably some that do overbook, and there's late additions and overrides and things like that occur that bring in extra students. Having classrooms that are too full is a really not a bad problem to have in higher education, because that means we're really out there teaching a lot of classes. But when we do have classrooms that are too full and we've got too many classrooms, well, in the aggregate, it's not going to seem as full, which is why we try not to look at those individual cases. I walk down the hallway at 4 p.m. and there's none of the classrooms are being used. Well, okay, in your 20-second observation, that may be accurate. So we try to look at the global data and those sort of things. Like the instance with that Mary had brought up about being primarily night. We could look at and go in the day and say, geez, there's nobody here. But you go there at night and you can't find a parking spot. Again, so looking at any single event isn't going to be enough. So we try to look at the large scale data to get to to allow it to equalize itself out. Yeah, how many seats you have in there?
Walk through, and that's what I'm inventory in Lamar right now. I'm counting chairs. We have the fire marshal.
Yeah, you have to have your 4 foot and all that. So there are code issues that are involved too. You can only, how many exits or how many passageways you have. You have to have your ADA accessibility. Your 4 foot corridors and your standoff distances and all that. So there are all those things that are taken into consideration. Again, that's why there's a range before we're ever really going to start, saying, are you sure? Unless, again, there's a huge swing. And I think what we'll probably see is we'll see a change. I have no doubt in my mind. You knocked me over with a cheese puff in a year. If I look at that number, it's the same as it is today. Okay? But I don't think it's going to be a shift from 30 to 90 square feet per seat, nor do I think it's going to be 30 to 10. I think it's about 31.4, so I think it may shift to like 28 or 35 or something like in that 20 to 40 window on the state aggregate. I think it really will. And that's just more accuracy. Again, it's a piece of data that wasn't really used for anything. So, I've always been of the idea that if you're not going to use it and I'm providing it to you, I'm really not going to put as much care and concern into making sure it's accurate because you're not using it. So make sure it's full, and I'll make it as accurate as possible. I'm not, I'll go through and I'll count the chairs. But if somebody's pulling chairs here or there, okay, whatever, and we won't update that as often. This is saying, with the SUE score and everything else, that it's really important to have a good, accurate count. And to really, I think, to read the faculty in too, that, hey, this is important. If you take 5 chairs from a room to teach a class, what do we do with things we borrow? We return them. Or somebody grab some of the students. There's always somebody that's looking for some extra credit. Hey, everybody grab a chair and pull them over. I mean, I coach kids lacrosse. You know, I got a bunch of 8-year-olds running around with sticks, swinging them at each other. And at the end of practice, I say, okay, you know, cones and donuts, little things on the field. You know, you got the cones that mark for drill. Cones, donuts, and balls, go. And they all run and get some donuts, and they all come back. And they set them in piles, and then they leave. I mean, so, I mean, almost, you know, that kind of thing. If you take them and it's a change, just put the chairs back, because it is that important. I think once they understand that there are things that it matters for, they're always mental. They're very intelligent people, and they understand. And they're very supportive. Now, sometimes it's not necessarily in the direction we would like it to be, but they do understand. And once it's explained to them that if we move these chairs, then, you know, it's going to have an impact and potentially a derogatory impact. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the problem is they say, okay, well, fine, screw the next guy. And we don't want to do that. You know, just, you know, it's a good old Boy Scout model, leave things better than when you found them and things like that. And we hope that everybody does that. The reality is most don't. And, you know, yeah, exactly. We're trying to save you. Help me help you. Jerry Maguire, right? Yes, ma'am.
Directly says anything about seats per square feet.
It doesn't. It's a thing we're using as an alert check to make sure the data are that we're within range. Because there's no score that's dependent on that. But if an institution, let's say they had an error that wasn't to their favor, they had an extra 0 got added onto their record. Well, all of a sudden their square feet per seat would drop down to 5, which would result in the appearance that there were more seats available. Hence, the percent fill the bottom would drop out on that. So, and vice versa, if an institution, say, forgot to put a 0 where it belongs, and 200 per person lecture hall is now 20 people, it would come out their percent fill would be 12,000% or something, and then that would again skew it. So it's just a quick check for us to look and go, okay, we're within tolerance here. So we're not going to look again. And just to check, and it's beneficial on both sides because errors occur both directions. The capacity is used to determine that number. However, the square feet per seat is not scored. Okay, it's just a secondary measure. It's kind of like say it's a red flag to say there may be an issue one way or the other. That's all. But if you don't have your capacity correct, then whatever that score is will be spurious. There's no other way to. There's no way to go about it. If it's not right, you're dividing by a number that's wrong, and hence the result will be wrong also. Okay. Anything further? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What specifically defines a category?
Okay. And on your 005, part of that is room type. Or we'll have room type with each of those lines of data. If it's in any 200 series room, 210, 220, 230, 250, 255, 235, any 200 series room that's taught in, those activities will go into the lab demand. There's some special equipment that is required to teach that course. We proceed on that premise, okay? The other activities that are taught in, of course, 110s, 350s, 310s, 680s, on down the line, 525s, whatever, are classroom type activities. Essentially, there aren't any special equipment, hence the activity is generalizable and can be held in any room. So those would be the classroom type activities. Now, over time, as we look at it, there may be a more defined way of going about categorizing those. That's what the working group, when we sat down, thought that was a very good measure. So far, it's come out pretty good. The numbers that you see, the difference between the utilization, which is specific to a 210, And the difference between that and the demand rate are really pretty much, they're co-varying at different levels. I mean, they kind of go like this. So again, it tells us that we're probably capturing the concept. Now, is the measure the best? Maybe not, but we're capturing. But that's how that number is determined. Essentially, either you need special equipment or you don't. Yeah, wherever. If it appears on the 5, we're without regard to the room type. And that's the idea of the measure itself, is that, it does need a room type. So if we were playing SimCity and we looked and we have all these classes and we were to line them up, that would determine, our relative demand. That's our demand on the system for classrooms compared to our supply, which is the number of classes in the inventory. And that's what it's intended to measure. Why is a gymnasium? What activity would, just like a gym floor? Well, and again, yeah. Okay, well then, and again, in the future, as we review it, there may be a more defining metric that we can use to determine that. But again, that would fall into, would you schedule that in a lab? Would you call that a lab activity? Do we want to migrate in the future and review, say, okay, I think, 520, 525, I think is the series room, 500 series. We want to call those, move those into lab-type demand activities. In that case, when we build those kind of things, we don't really look at those as being labs, more general instruction. So I don't know. It's something to put on the lot to check over time. If you have that specialized equipment, say in a ballet room, and then would you not categorize that as a class lab? Then it would be captured in a class lab. It would be in a 200 series room, would then hence be in the lab demand portion also. Well, yes, but and again, these are the kind of scenes that we want to bring out for discussion, and that's possibly something in the 3-year review is, are there some specific activity room types based on the given data that we want to migrate into one pile or another? Perhaps there are. Again, and to get this thing rolled out, I think they've worked a great job, and I think using that definition to develop is very valid. That if it's in one of those 200 series rooms. But I think those are all very good points. Harry.
So on the CBM-5,
yes, sir.
To capture that demand, we're going to have to report as many records as we can from the CBM-4.
Well, you should just report everything that you have a building number and room number, like you do now or should now.
A lot of classes are taught in the professor's office.
There's no reason not to now.
So that will be the objective. Make sure that on the 5 we report all that.
Report your activities with the location. It's building and room report, its name. What activities are they and where do they go on? So, that's... Otherwise we wouldn't know they exist. You wouldn't get the demand measure. And the idea of the demand measure is that when you have an activity, there needs to be an academic space as programmed and assessed. Of course, it has to be on the 4, and the room has to be on the 11, 14, and the inventory. But again, it tells us that, if there's an activity, if there's a scheduled academic activity, then the institution should have a place to do the activity. The expectation or the thought is that all of those lectures are going on in lecture halls. Well, that's not always the best place. So that's what demand measure kind of helps to measure that. Sure. And you may have a doctorate level, or in some cases master, or even an undergraduate, where there's 3 people in it. Do you want to occupy a 50-person classroom with 3 people? Well, this measure actually gives you a disincentive against doing that. While you'll get the utilization rate, you'll get equally dinged, or probably more heavily dinged, in terms of your percent fill. So it does give a measure of using the right amount of space in the right supply economy. If you're going to turn on the air handlers and the lights for 50 people, then have a good amount of people in there to do it. If not, don't turn on the lights and air handlers for 50 people. And, force the cleaning and the wear and tear on the facilities and those kind of things. Ma'am.
I'll get credit for having, I probably don't need that, but go on. For teaching something in a faculty member's office, do I, as an inventory person, then need to prorate the use of that office as part?
Well, okay, would you need to prorate the functional, correct me, the functional use, correct? Yeah, well, what is a functional category, right? Okay, the other one is functional categories. So prorate functional category, that person, what would the functional category be if they're teaching in there? Would be 11. What would it normally be? 11. There wouldn't be a need to prorate. Well, in administrative duties and things like that, there perhaps may need. Again, I'd have to see the specific instance and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. 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 And I understand you're thinking about layout, but one of the things about the layout is tables move. Well, I'm not saying taking them out of the room. Well, I mean, there's different. There's a U shape. There's, the circle. Well, I'm saying there are many different arrays of classrooms, whether it's U shape, whether there's V's, or whether they're rectangle. I would say from my perspective, and we can open up for discussion, please do, that the array of the furniture within the room would not define it as special equipment. That would be my position. That right,
Well, there is a fundamental difference between a lecture and a lab. I mean, a lecture meets Monday, Wednesday, Friday from noon to 1. A lab meets, there is a difference in the way those are scheduled at universities. I know. But what I'm saying is, it's still, I have a classroom, go back to the computer thing, I have a classroom that's got computers in it that they're photo lab computers, and that's really all they're using them for. But they're not scheduling labs in there. They're scheduling classes in there. It's a classroom. No. Sorry, it's a classroom. But it's a classroom. Is it a class? Are they scheduling classes in there? Or are they scheduling a lab?
again, going back to the nominal definition of laboratory, that there is specialized equipment particular to a given discipline. The array of the rooms, the array of the tables and chairs, I would not say, in my opinion, that that specifies as equipment, as specialized equipment, because in my educational experience, I sat in a variety of arrays, from a circle to pods, to in a room, pods of chairs, and to this type of array, to U-shaped lecture halls. All of them were classrooms. And then and I'm not saying they may not want to. I'm not sure that it would be impossible to use them. And again, I would not state that, and again, you know, it's yours to defend it and not it, that the position of those tables would classify as special equipment, whether they're big tables or small tables. I would say that the mere presence of a certain array of tables and chairs does not qualify as special equipment, does not make it a lab. Yeah, I think, you know, again, based on the nominal definition, the type of furniture and the array of the furniture, I go back, I do not believe that would define special equipment particular to a given discipline, because both personal experience, I guess that would be phenomenological evidence, and I don't. Right. So. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, does anybody believe that that would be qualify as a class laboratory? Well, and again, it's that. Okay, and again, here's the bottom line on this. There are, again, I'll go back to the number. 327 octillion possible combinations, which means any two people getting it, the likelihood is remote at best that any two people would get the same answer, even given the same inputs. Remote at best. Probably not winning the lottery because we have common knowledge, but you know, you're getting I'd say about a $1,000 scratch-off ticket if you get both of them correct. That's about the odds of it. It comes down to the point is defending the decision and being able to have a logical process by which that was reached. Okay? That's really what it comes down to. You can have a variety of labs, and you could say that here's my evidence, that here's all the sections that are in their lab. But to make the statement that, well, because these tables are here, and that is insufficient to define the lab, that the tables then, or whatever kind, if they're, I don't know, 5,000-pound oak, you know, monoliths, it still does not define that. Now, if you say these are all lab sections, here they are, here's this semester's schedule, and you can see all lab sections scheduled there. There's a logical process and a thought, and I would say, okay, fair enough. But to ask the question that these tables, based on what their mere existence, would not say, oh, those are special tables just for that room. You know, I would have to say that that would not be a defining characteristic. Do I think that saying that, you know, that their only lab sections are scheduled in there because of these special, early childhood development, whatever, and you can show that that's what's scheduled in there? I think that's defensible. But saying that, you know, these special tables would not, in my opinion, be defensible. If given the other side, you look at there, it's lecture, 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 there might be a lab, lecture, lecture, then it would not be defensible. And is it used by one discipline or a specific discipline? So that would be defensible, I believe. Does that kind of answer your case too, Mary? Okay, super. Sir. They're two different rooms. I mean, are you asking me to classify this room right now? This is a meeting room. This is a 680. Yeah, 680, a meeting room. This is a meeting room. Now, if you're talking about observation area, I think that there is a specified one of the labs has for observation. I'd have to look at the manual for one of the space use codes. Was that right, Jennifer? Space use is room type, right? Okay, got one right. Yes! You have no idea how good that feels to actually get it right once. But the space use code, and there's one in there for observation and practice. They used a lot in child development centers that are used for both, daycare and for student participation. I want to say it's one of the 200 series rooms. I could be wrong, but I'd have to look at the manual for that. Yes, sir. I believe the current guidance is all buildings are reported. All buildings. Room data are for E&G rooms. And that's one of the things that magnified the issue with replacement cost is when institutions reported all those other rooms, which they can, and it's more accurate, those numbers then hit the replacement value and did some wild things to it. All lease spaces is inventory, yes. Now, there's some things that excludes from placement cost. It doesn't go into placement cost and other things, but lease space is included. Mm-hmm. But lease space is supposed to be there, and I think it's ownership code 5 or 6. I can't remember, for leased at the market rate. Right. Yeah, and E&G and not and all that. Right, and that's one of the things that had gone on that kind of caused some ripple, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing to do, but it triggered a response in a formula that we had not seen before. And so that's why we're having to redo it, that model. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Your E&G room records are required to be inventory. All the buildings are under the control of the institution. You have a building report and a room report. All your buildings go in. Now your room records are your E&G rooms. On the which kind? Right. Right, and because the building characteristics, the gross area on the building is part of the building report. The net assignable is part of the building report. And the E&G is a sum of those E&G spaces reported from the room records.
We have kind of unique situations, like a training space, turbine, where the students go there and climb up some time each semester. It would be a different difficulty than what our standard campus is. But would that be considered a lab?
It's in one of the wind turbines. Wow. It's more of a piece of equipment. And there are some times when equipment is reported. A boat, a vessel is reported on the inventory. I have to do some research on that one. A ship. I stand corrected. A ship.
That relates back to what you said, like on the football field where you're doing training. But this one here is a volume in space.
Yeah, and that doesn't. There are characteristics of a building that it has to have a foundation, a roof, at least 3 walls, serviced by a utility, exclusive of lighting. So is there water or gas going in there, or is it just lights that go in there? Yeah, then it would not qualify. The building characteristics in the definition of building, what is a building and what buildings would be included. I think if you look at that, it'll show that it's not. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, right. It's kind of like that's your laboratory, that's your field trip, so to speak. Your practical exercise. Say field trip. That sounds like grade school or something, but that's your on-site exercise, I think. Mary, you had a question, ma'am? That's that E&G replacement value thing that I'm talking about, is that they do take in, it permutes those data around. I don't even want to get into how deep, because really, to be honest, it took, hey Paul, how long did it take to tear that formula apart to be able to go, okay, that's what it does.
So we should not be reporting.
What we would like to see, is everybody reports all the space, because something could be auxiliary today and you can change some uses tomorrow. So it's better that you do. The downside, and that we're fixing that, is that replacement cost ripple. Now, is there a requirement when the system is going to pull, when they pull out a sample, they're going to pull out E&G space. It's an E&G facilities inventory. So, and uses change, so it's in an institution's best interest to inventory all of their space. Not just for that. I mean, there are so many other uses of these data other than sending it to us so we can put it together and make a space model. Exactly. You look at your utility studies, in some cases, you might want to know ceiling heights so that you can look at your cube feet of air and your turnover, especially with some of the things going forward, LEED, and those kind of initiatives. All those things come into play. So it's in your institutional best interest to inventory all your space. Yeah, you look at, really, it's just, it is. It's looking and saying, it varies semester to semester, and this is the annual inventory. It's our estimate that, that 40% of the time it's used by student group, not E&G purposes, and 60% of the time it's used by E&G. And really, that's about your best guess, other than hiring someone to stand there with a stopwatch, go, stop, over a period of 12 months, or a really full-time job. Perhaps. Well, that's where your processes and procedures go. Okay, how did you come up with that answer? How did you glean that? Well, where our procedures follow to do, we look at the historic scheduling of it, et cetera, and that's what came up with. And so that's a referential to your very, very, very good idea to have them formalized, which normally means written down and defined. Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it's like it was saying, inventorying individual computers, and I issued that over to Harry. Harry's got that computer, and each year, Harry, you still got your computer? Yeah, it's right here. I come take the protege, and I hit it. Yep, it's good. The facilities inventory isn't like that. You have to be out in the space. You have to be out looking at it, and integrated with the other agencies on the campus that deal with it, whether it's your physical plant, custodial, and all of those, to be able to determine those sorts of things. It's really a holistic effort. You can't take any one person in an institution and say, you're now the space guru and go figure it out. It doesn't work like that. I mean, well, you can come up with an inventory and you can come up with some numbers, but I don't think they stand scrutiny. Sure. Health-related institutions. Oh, you still have to account for the space. Right, and, is that fair? I don't know. It depends if you're health-related or not. If you're health-related, it sounds pretty good to me. But in term... But, the... Yeah, I mean, we only know what you report to us. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, we don't want to take anything away, but we can't assume things we don't know. And if it's not, if your registrar's office doesn't know it, well, then we certainly won't know it. So that's several, agencies detached. I mean, if they're not reporting those sections or however that information is getting to the registrar, then we would never know it. So the issue isn't getting us the model or anything else. It's really getting the information to the registrar, if indeed it should. Another program area that's a lot like that is architecture. Any architects here? Boy, you got better than me. Because I'll tell you, those folks, but, right, they're around the clock, but only so much of that can be reported because of accreditation. But they have to have that space available in order to do those things. It's just one of those things that happens, and they deal with it, and they look at it. And is it studio space, is it class lab, look at predominance of use, and you just categorize it. But what you look at is when you look at those individual spaces, and that's not good for that one space. You remember, you got that big campus you were talking about. So over the entire campus, it equalizes it out because there are those other labs that are jammed up that you get credit for every single thing for.
Calculate and whatever, and everybody's beating themselves against the wall in this room to get these space calculations right and the inventory right. How, other than, and you are an example of this in Texas Tech, because you and I have spoken about this, how do you drag the rest of your institution, or can the coordinating board help us drag the academic side into the room?
That's an excellent question. In fact, please.
We're not comment on that. I think we all have that. I think if you have helped us with it by changing it. Moving from a guideline to a standard gives my office now the authority to say, I think we're going to see significant listening habits. They don't want to not.
Well,
I don't think our academic department got there yet.
okay. Well, let me pose this to you. Well, I can give you part of the benefit, and we were talking about on the way out. How many here are HEAF institutions? How much is each square foot of your deficit worth in HEAF dollars? You know, because we told you. A little over $10 a square foot. Put it in perspective, $40 each ceiling tile. That's the exact analogy that I use in talking to the faculty at Tech. It's each ceiling tile. I'm not going to count them. It's $40 a ceiling tile. If we positive or efficient use of the space as fiscal rewards. Because if I can do the same amount, the same stuff without a loss of effectiveness, without an appropriability issue, and I can do it in half the space, that's half that space that I'm not heating, I'm not cooling, I'm not maintaining, I'm not depreciating. And all the additional costs go with that. Plus, I can now take that other half and it rolls into the deficit because there are fiscal benefits to positive and efficient space use. The fact is this, institutions want money to have bonds for new projects. They want to either renovate, major renovations, they want new buildings. But the counter to that is what? Well, I want a new bike. Well, you don't ride the one you got. So why should you need a new one? I need a new building. Why? The ones you're using aren't, the ones you have aren't being used to that level. So when we look at that, there are ways to look at how much something's being used. Yeah, I only ride my bike once a day for 75 miles. Oh, okay. So there's lots of different ways to look at that elephant to get that picture. So I agree with you. But there is a cost benefit because when you start to really measure what's the amount of reward in terms of heat by having that, and then all the secondary costs, maintenance costs run between $20 and $40, I think, $20, $25. Normally, to feed the assessment statewide for a need for that, the detail was already there. There's no additional detail that the institution is going to. The same report that's been sent since I've been at the institution. Is it? I mean, to the detail of how the space is being used and that sort of thing. Well, when you also look at the A21 information, when you're going to do your federal indirect cost recovery, you're determining your rate, you're also looking at all those additional uses of those spaces. And when you add it up, it's like margin economics. Yeah, if you look at one room, it might not be that much. But when you've got 26,000 rooms over 7 or 8 million square feet, all of a sudden that margin benefit gets huge. And the way that you and go into that question is, how do you get that across? A thing I laugh about called the universal translator. The one language everybody understands. And the universal translator is an S with a line through the middle. And when you use that, it doesn't matter what your academic field, it doesn't matter what language you speak. Truly, if you put that S through the middle and a number, they go, oh, then it's understandable. I think you make a great point by changing it to a standard. That now provides people say, look, we need to do this. Because the fact is that the oversight people at the legislature, the bill that came out, SB 746 or HB 746, was based on the idea, and in some cases accurately, that classrooms are sitting vacant at night. And they're just sitting there, so they're not being used. Well, that may or may not be true. But again, how do you determine that? Well, you get the data. The best we can do is to serve the needs of the legislature and others, and do that at an appropriate level, and do that at a minimal transaction cost to the institutions. I don't know. It hasn't happened yet. We just started the standard. Well, it very well may not, and I guess there is a view of it that it's not going to make any difference. So why bother? That's a view. I think there's another view that says it's a very positive thing that allows institutions and empowers those folks out there grinding away at doing this stuff, trying to get the word out to the folks, to let them get that message across. And I think those are two different views, and one may be right, wrong, both right. I don't know, but I understand your view. Well, and I think over time that can be done, but the bottom line is that I think that cost benefit analysis could also be done on the level of the institution on terms of having an empty chair. How much did it cost to heat and cool 20% of that room when it wasn't needed? I mean, I think there are a lot of levels to look at this, and I think that institutions and being good stewards of the state's resources, which these are. I mean, really, if you look at the space like it's money, and treat it with the same care and control, because it is. I mean, if you do the numbers, what's the most valuable asset? Now, people are the greatest asset. I got that. But the most valuable asset that you have on a campus, well, it's the buildings. And I always thought it was odd that institutions many times, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, will look at a cell phone call and go, hey, there's a personal cell phone call. And we'll spend $50 or $60 for transaction costs chasing a 50-cent cell phone call. When we've got space that's a room of 100 square feet, it's going to be $250 a year for just its mere existence, and that kind of fixed assets and depreciation and the maintenance and everything else that goes with it, plus the cost that additional space will have and potential heat funding. That the impact that has. And I think that's another level of cost benefit. So while I agree with you, I think there's a cost benefit analysis to be done at the institutional level, and perhaps these things will prompt some of that. And the only thing we can do is take these numbers without a lot of those costs to you, that you don't have to provide anything additionally. No additional information, the same reports, just stay on your track and keep going. And then we'll provide some metrics. Now, will that require some people to then take a look at how much are we filling these? So I think one side of the benefit and the cost feeds the other. Hopefully that cycle will result in better overall for the state. So I do understand what you're saying, but I think there's another view of that. There's another way to look at that. Any more? This is great. Ma'am. Yes. I'm sorry? Oh, absolutely not. We just recorded it for personal use, of course. Yes. We'll have, and Paul, we're going to put a link out or email it. I mean, we talked about it briefly this morning. What do you want? Yeah, you go on thecb.state.texas.us, facility resource plan, and go in there, and there'll be a link for this cast. Chris. Yes. Yes, I believe there were some technical difficulties yesterday. I think we ironed them out today, and I think we got the whole thing recorded. We have not reviewed that yet. Yes. Which I can't see what this is. That's not out yet. It's not on the website yet. And it's also written into the rules. If you look under the Coordinating Board Rules 17, under project considerations, it's one of them along with construction costs.
Zip codes?
We didn't. They're in the. This is actually. Go ahead, Paul. We were talking about this earlier. I'll let you karaoke it.
How do we get to it again? I don't have much luck navigating. How do I get to it?
Really?
Call Kennedy?
Give me a phone call. I'll get you there, okay? Yeah.
What's it up to?
It's if you go to our main thecb.state.texas.us webpage, there's a left-hand pane. Find the finance in that blue margin. Right off of that, there'll be a data point you can use, and it's not the finance and resource planning webpage. It's the edc.org page.
Okay.
It's a different webpage, and that may be why you're having trouble finding it. All right. But you can give me a call.
And this is part of that entire manual. So the CIP codes are another section. We didn't want to redo that whole big manual when we didn't need to.
Expanded the CIP code, right? It's not, pretty much any CIP code you can get off the web.
CIP codes are in that printout. All the rest of them are right out of the
Yeah, I think it's what NCES is the proponent. NCES is the proponent for catalog of instructional programs. Yeah, those are they're specialized to Texas.
So ours are administrative.
Yeah, those are the unique one. That additional maybe there's 12, 15. Those are unique.
100,000.
Yeah, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. It has a business office. Oh, a placement office. There's a. Well, one of the things in terms of any of those business or finance fields, you have to be very careful not to confuse academic fields, which are the normal standard across the board, and those Texas CIPs in those fields like fiscal operations or those kind of things. You have to be very careful not to cross those two, because one would say that's an academic function, the other one would say it was fiscal operations or administration. Say it one more time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Prorate Harry. Harry, go stand in the corner. Harry's got to stand in the corner now. A placement office, it would fall under the placement. A placement office. It's a subcategory of it, but it's still a placement office. The function that's going on is the placement office. Now, if they were the placement office and finance section, well, then you would prorate it, as Harry was saying. But if it's strictly that, the usage code appropriate to that field. Okay. Anything else? Ma'am. Any of us? Probably Jennifer. Jennifer's over there going, what? Yeah, the one who can't defend herself with the mic. No, any of us you get a hold of, you'll be able to get an answer. Okay. Nothing further. 2:46. Folks, we appreciate your time. Safe travels. Uh-huh.